The night was shrouded in an eerie silence, the kind that only the most ancient of places can possess. Deep within a forgotten valley, nestled between towering cliffs and dense forests, lay an ancient tomb, untouched for centuries. It was a tomb that had never been marked on any map, hidden away from the prying eyes of historians, explorers, and looters alike. But tonight, the tomb was finally uncovered. The ground had trembled as if the earth itself had been disturbed by the intrusion of modern man. The moment the stone lid of the tomb was pried open, a gust of air rushed out, as if the ancient king inside had been waiting for centuries to exhale. The small group of archaeologists stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the sheer gravity of what they had just discovered. The tomb was no ordinary burial site. It was a royal crypt, filled with relics far beyond the time of its origin. Inside, the walls were covered in intricate carvings that no one had seen before, symbols of power and mystery that seemed to hint at something far older than the known kingdoms of this land. The tomb held the remains of a king who had long been forgotten, his name erased from the history books. But the question on everyone's mind was, why? This discovery was more than just a momentous archaeological find. It was the unearthing of a long-lost legacy, a forgotten monarch whose story had been deliberately erased from the pages of history. For centuries, historians had wondered about the existence of this ruler. Some had believed that this king's very existence had been a myth, a story woven into the tapestry of time by ancient storytellers. But now the truth was undeniable. This king had existed, and his bloodline had shaped the course of history in ways no one had ever imagined. The first few moments inside the tomb were filled with the usual rush of excitement, as the archaeologists documented every detail, carefully cataloging the objects and relics that littered the crypt. But as they ventured deeper, something began to stir in the air, something that felt far beyond the realm of mere discovery. It was a sensation, almost like a whisper, as if the tomb was alive with secrets that were meant to remain buried. The walls of the tomb seemed to pulse with an energy that could not be explained by science or logic. Was it merely the thrill of finding something so old, so rare, or was there something more to this tomb than met the eye? It was clear that whoever had buried this king had intended for his legacy to remain hidden from the world. But why? And for how long had they succeeded? As the group ventured further into the crypt, the answers started to come into focus. The first clue was an inscription near the entrance of the tomb, a single line written in a language that no one could decipher. It was the language of a forgotten people, one that had long since disappeared from the historical record. The translation would take days, but the archaeologists instinctively knew that this inscription was key. It hinted at something darker, something powerful, that had caused this king's name to be erased from history. But the mystery deepened when they discovered a series of ornate artifacts that seemed out of place, objects that shouldn't have been found in a tomb from this time period. These relics were not just treasures. They were symbols of a secretive order, one that had been rumored to have existed in the shadows for centuries. The more they uncovered, the more it became clear. This king's bloodline had been intertwined with forces far beyond the reach of ordinary rulers. As they continued to explore, the group stumbled upon a hidden chamber at the far end of the tomb. Inside, they found what appeared to be a ceremonial altar, adorned with strange carvings and symbols. Atop the altar was a sealed scroll, carefully preserved over the centuries. The scroll was unlike anything they had ever seen. The language was strange, almost unearthly, as though it was not meant for human eyes. The archaeologists knew that they had just uncovered something that would change everything they knew about history. But what was it? What had this king done, or what had he been part of, that warranted his name being wiped from the historical record? Who were these secretive figures who had placed such importance on protecting this bloodline? The night deepened, and as the moonlight filtered through the cracks in the tomb, casting an ethereal glow over the chamber, the archaeologists felt the weight of the discovery press upon them. The tomb had been sealed for so long, and yet it had held onto its secrets with an unwavering grip. As they examined the tomb's contents, it became clear that this was no ordinary king, no ordinary bloodline. This was a king whose legacy had been carefully erased, a monarch whose bloodline held the key to some of the greatest secrets of history. As the group prepared to leave the tomb, their minds raced with the implications of what they had just uncovered. Who was this forgotten king? What had he known that others wanted buried? And most importantly, what had they stumbled upon that could forever alter the way we view the past? The answers would not come easily. They would take years of study, years of digging through ancient texts, and perhaps even more discoveries in the future to fully uncover the story that had been hidden for centuries. But one thing was certain. This king's bloodline was not merely a footnote in history. It was a legacy that stretched back through time, woven into the very fabric of empires, secret societies, and kingdoms that shaped the world. This was only the beginning of the journey, a journey that would unravel the truth about a bloodline so powerful, so mysterious, that it could never be fully erased from the pages of history. The discovery of this tomb would change everything. And as the archaeologists left the site that night, they knew that the path ahead was fraught with danger and revelation. What they had uncovered would lead them down a road from which there was no turning back. Power has always been a fluid, elusive concept, one that cannot be held in a single hand for too long without being tainted, twisted, or lost altogether. The world has seen countless dynasties rise and fall, each family claiming bloodlines that stretch back to gods, heroes, or kings. But what makes these bloodlines so powerful? Why does the very act of being born into a royal family give one access to unimaginable wealth, authority, and influence? And more importantly, what secrets lie buried in these bloodlines? Secrets that could alter the course of history. From the earliest civilizations to the present day, bloodlines have played a pivotal role in shaping the world as we know it. These royal families and dynasties were more than just figures of political power. They were symbols of divine right, of an unbroken chain linking the living with the gods, heroes, or even mythical ancestors. Bloodlines were sacred, not just because of the wealth or political power they bestowed, but because they were seen as vessels of destiny, guardians of knowledge, and bearers of a legacy that was meant to last for eternity. In the ancient world, the belief in divine kingship was widespread. Pharaohs in Egypt, emperors in Rome, and kings across Mesopotamia all claimed a divine connection, whether it was a direct link to gods or a special favor from the heavens. The idea that royal blood carried the essence of the divine was not just propaganda, it was deeply ingrained in the belief systems of these cultures. Kings were not merely rulers. They were seen as living gods, their authority coming directly from a higher power, one that gave them the right to rule with unquestioned authority. In Egypt, the pharaoh was considered the living Horus, a divine incarnation of the god of the sky. His bloodline was sacred, preserved by centuries of divine protection. The very act of being born into this bloodline was considered to bestow not only power over the land and people, but also the favor of the gods. The same was true for other ancient civilizations, where royal bloodlines were carefully guarded, protected, and revered. But as history marched on, these bloodlines became more complicated. With power came intrigue, betrayal, and a thirst for control that often led to the downfall of the ruling family. As empires expanded and kingdoms fell, royal bloodlines became battlegrounds, fought over by rivals, usurpers, and even members of the family itself. Yet despite the treachery and betrayal that often followed, these bloodlines remained symbols of ultimate authority and influence. The Merovingian dynasty of early medieval France offers a fascinating example of the intersection between royal bloodlines and secrecy. The Merovingians were said to be descendants of a royal family that traced its lineage back to the biblical King David. This connection to the Old Testament kings lent them a mystique that transcended mere political power. But as powerful as the Merovingians were, their reign was shrouded in mystery. Their connection to the divine was not just a matter of birthright. It was a matter of secrecy and intrigue. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Merovingians is the question of their true origins. According to some historians, they were not merely political rulers, but were instead part of a far more ancient and secretive bloodline. There are theories that suggest they were descendants of a hidden lineage that had been protected for centuries, a bloodline that held knowledge and power that could shake the foundations of Christianity itself. This theory has been explored in countless books and documentaries, each attempting to peel back the layers of history to reveal the truth behind the Merovingian dynasty? Were they truly descendants of Christ, as some legends suggest? Or were they simply a family that found a way to manipulate the religious and political systems to their advantage? These questions are not just matters of historical curiosity. They are at the heart of the intrigue surrounding bloodlines throughout history. The idea that a family could hold knowledge that is capable of altering the very course of civilization is a powerful one. What could these bloodlines reveal? What could they control? And who exactly would benefit from keeping such knowledge hidden? The bloodlines of Europe's royal families are similarly enshrouded in mystery. From the Habsburgs of Austria to the Bourbons of France, these families have dominated the political landscape of Europe for centuries. But beneath the surface of their grand palaces and regal portraits lies a darker, more complex history. Bloodlines were not just symbols of divine right and destiny. They were also the currency of power. Marriages between royal families were carefully orchestrated to preserve bloodlines and expand influence. But these marriages also created rivalries, treacheries, and betrayals that are still felt to this day. Take, for instance, the Habsburg dynasty, one of Europe's most powerful royal families. Their bloodline was both their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. On one hand, the Habsburg strategic marriages helped to create an empire that stretched across Europe, from Spain to the Holy Roman Empire. On the other hand, their obsession with preserving their bloodline led to a series of inbreeding practices that caused genetic defects and physical deformities, the most famous of which was Charles II of Spain, whose severe health problems were attributed to generations of intermarriage within the Habsburg family. The consequences of these royal unions were far-reaching, affecting not only the Habsburgs but the future of Europe itself. The concept of royal bloodlines was not restricted to Europe, of course. Across the world, powerful families have sought to protect and preserve their bloodlines. In China, the imperial family's bloodline was believed to be the direct descendant of the Yellow Emperor, the legendary founding figure of Chinese civilization. In Japan, the imperial family claims to be the world's oldest continuing hereditary monarchy, with a lineage that stretches back over 2,000 years. These bloodlines are not merely historical curiosities. They are vital to the identity and authority of the nations they rule. The sanctity of these bloodlines is deeply embedded in the culture, religion, and history of these civilizations. But while royal bloodlines may seem unbreakable, the truth is that they are often fragile. Time, conflict, and power struggles have a way of unraveling even the most carefully constructed dynasties. When these bloodlines fall, they leave behind a vacuum of power, one that often leads to chaos, bloodshed, and the rewriting of history. The story of these bloodlines is not just a story of kings and queens. It is a story of ambition, survival, and the lengths people will go to in order to control the legacy of the past. So why are these bloodlines so important? What makes them the key to understanding the hidden forces that shaped the world? The answer lies in the mystery of what these bloodlines can reveal. Hidden within their veins is not just the power to rule, but the power to shape the course of history itself. These bloodlines have survived for centuries, passed down through generations, and carried with them the weight of secrets that have been buried in the dust of time. The intrigue surrounding royal bloodlines is not just about the men and women who have held power, but about the knowledge they carried. For as long as humanity has existed, blood has been seen as the ultimate source of power, power that transcends time, that reaches back to ancient civilizations, that binds families together across the ages. The legacy of these bloodlines is not just the history of empires, but the untold story of humanity itself. And as we peel back the layers of history, we begin to realize that the bloodlines of power may hold the key to unlocking some of the greatest mysteries of our past. The land of Egypt, with its vast deserts and the towering pyramids that have stood the test of time, is a place where history is etched into every grain of sand. It is a civilization that not only shaped the ancient world but also left behind a legacy that continues to haunt the imagination. The pharaohs, the divine rulers of Egypt, are among the most enigmatic and fascinating figures in history. Their reigns were marked by grandeur, mystery, and a belief in their divine right to rule, a right that was linked not just to the throne but to the very blood coursing through their veins. The ancient Egyptians believed that their rulers were not merely men and women, but living gods. The pharaoh was seen as the earthly incarnation of Horus, the god of the sky, and upon their death, they were believed to be transformed into Osiris, the god of the afterlife. This divine connection elevated the bloodline of the pharaohs to a level of sanctity that few others in history could claim. The very act of being born into this bloodline was seen as a divine blessing, a mark that one was chosen by the gods to lead the people of Egypt. The power that came with being part of this royal lineage was unlike any other. But as time passed, the Egyptians faced the inevitable erosion of their power. Empires rose and fell, and dynasties crumbled, leaving behind only fragments of their once mighty legacies. Among the most mysterious aspects of Egyptian history is the question of the lost kings, those rulers whose names were erased from the records, whose bloodlines were hidden away in the sands of time. Who were these rulers, and why did history deliberately conceal their existence? One such king, whose name remains lost to history, is believed by some to have been one of the most powerful pharaohs of all. His tomb was never discovered by modern archaeologists, and no record of his reign has survived. Yet, whispers of his existence continue to circulate among Egyptologists and historians, suggesting that he was an important figure in the early years of Egypt's dynastic period. Some even believe that this lost pharaoh was the true founder of Egypt's most famous royal family, the Fourth Dynasty, and that his descendants went on to build the pyramids that we associate with the Golden Age of ancient Egypt. If this lost king did exist, it raises the tantalizing question: why was his name wiped from the records? Was he a tyrant whose reign was too controversial to be remembered? Or did his bloodline pose a threat to the established order of Egyptian society? These questions have sparked centuries of speculation, and though evidence remains scarce, the search for answers has only grown more intense over the years. In the 19th and 20th centuries, archaeologists began to uncover the burial sites of some of Egypt's greatest pharaohs, such as Tutankhamun, Ramses II, and Seti I. But it is the tomb of the lost kings that remains the most elusive. For decades, excavations along the Nile River have turned up mysterious artifacts and cryptic symbols that seem to point to a hidden royal lineage. But every attempt to unearth the tombs of these lost pharaohs has been met with failure. Some scholars believe that the lost pharaoh's tomb lies hidden beneath the sands of the Valley of the Kings, the burial place of Egypt's most famous rulers. Others suggest that it may lie beneath the Great Pyramid of Giza itself, which has long been a source of fascination for those who believe in the existence of hidden chambers and secret passages. The idea that a forgotten king could be entombed in one of the most famous structures in the world is both thrilling and tantalizing. But why would such a powerful ruler's final resting place remain hidden for so long? The mystery deepens when we consider the possibility that this lost king's bloodline may not have been entirely human. Ancient Egyptian texts and artifacts are filled with references to gods, divine beings, and supernatural forces. The Egyptians believed that their pharaohs were direct descendants of the gods, and many of them claimed to have received their divine power from the gods themselves. But could there be more to these claims than mere religious rhetoric? Some theories suggest that the lost king's bloodline may have been linked to a race of beings that were not entirely human. The notion of divine or semi-divine rulers has always been a part of human history, from the gods of Greece to the kings of Mesopotamia. But the Egyptians took this concept to a different level. There are records in Egyptian mythology that hint at the existence of otherworldly beings, possibly from the stars, who came down to earth and intermingled with humans. If such beings existed, could the lost king be one of their descendants? Could this bloodline carry within it not just the power of the gods but the knowledge of ancient civilizations that has been lost to time? The idea of extraterrestrial influence on ancient cultures has been a topic of debate for centuries, and while it remains controversial, the mysteries surrounding Egypt's lost kings have provided fertile ground for such speculation. Whether one believes in the ancient astronaut theory or not, it is clear that Egypt's rulers possessed knowledge and capabilities that seem far beyond what was available to their contemporaries. The precision of the pyramids, the advanced medical practices, and the intricate knowledge of astronomy all point to a civilization that understood the cosmos in a way that modern scholars are still trying to comprehend. But the lost kings of Egypt are not just important because of their possible connection to extraterrestrial beings. They are also significant because they represent a part of Egyptian history that has been deliberately obscured. Why were these rulers erased from the records? Could their bloodline have posed a threat to the established power structures of the time? Some scholars argue that the erasure of certain pharaohs was part of a larger effort to consolidate power within the hands of a select few. The priests of Ammonius, the ruling elite of ancient Egypt, were notorious for their influence over the throne. It is possible that these powerful figures sought to suppress the memory of certain rulers whose bloodlines did not fit into their carefully constructed narrative. The implications of these lost bloodlines extend beyond Egypt's borders. The question of royal bloodlines and their influence on history is a global one. In many ancient cultures, the belief that kings and rulers were chosen by the gods was widespread. From Mesopotamia to the Americas, the idea of divine right and bloodlines was central to the power dynamics of the ancient world. And in many cases, the rulers who held these divine bloodlines were not just political figures. They were symbols of a larger cosmic order, tasked with maintaining the balance between heaven and earth. The story of Egypt's lost kings is just one piece of this larger puzzle. As we search for answers about these rulers and their bloodlines, we begin to uncover not just the secrets of Egypt, but the secrets of human history itself. What if the lost kings were not just forgotten rulers, but keepers of ancient knowledge, knowledge that could rewrite the way we view the past? The pursuit of this knowledge has led historians, archaeologists, and explorers down countless paths, some of which have led to remarkable discoveries, while others have ended in dead ends. But the mystery of the lost pharaohs remains. As long as the pyramids stand and the sands of Egypt continue to shift, the legacy of the lost kings will continue to haunt us, urging us to uncover the secrets that lie buried beneath the surface of history. In the shadow of history, there exists a dynasty that has sparked more legends and theories than perhaps any other: the Merovingians. This enigmatic family of early medieval France, though once powerful enough to rule vast territories, now stands as a symbol of the mysterious and often forgotten kingships that the annals of time. Their reign is marked not just by the weight of their power, but by the myths and the mysterious claims that have surrounded them for centuries. But the most intriguing question remains: what if their bloodline was more than just royal? What if they were the descendants of something far greater, something tied to the ancient and divine, perhaps even to a bloodline that could change the very course of history? The Merovingian story begins with their founder, Merovech, whose origin is as shrouded in myth as it is in historical fact. Legends say that Merovech was the son of a sea god, an entity that links him not to mere mortal kingship but to the divine and the supernatural. It is said that he was born of a union between a human woman and a mysterious figure from the sea, adding an aura of mysticism to the family's beginnings. This divine or semi-divine birth would form the cornerstone of the Merovingian dynasty's claim to power. They were not just kings by human right, but by divine appointment. For centuries, this divine connection was said to be the key to their authority and influence over the lands they ruled. But as with all great dynasties, the question arises: where does myth end and history begin? The Merovingians were a powerful force in early medieval Europe, but the further one digs into their past, the more elusive the truth becomes. Their reign is best known for the Merovingian kings who controlled much of what is now France, Belgium, and Western Germany. At their height, they were considered the kings of the Franks, one of the most powerful and influential groups in Europe during the post-Roman era. Yet, despite their power, the Merovingians were often viewed with suspicion, not only by their contemporaries but also by those who would come after them. The rise of the Merovingians occurred at a time when the Western Roman Empire had fallen, and Europe was in the midst of a dark age. As the Roman Empire crumbled, the Franks, led by Merovech and his descendants, seized control of much of Gaul. They emerged as the heirs to the Roman legacy, but their success was not just due to military might. The Merovingians carried with them an aura of divine authority, one that made them seem more like the monarchs of ancient times, rulers of a world in which the gods still walked among men. This divine right was not just a matter of political power but a claim to something much more mysterious. It is here that the theories surrounding the Merovingians begin to take shape. Some have suggested that their divine lineage was tied to the biblical King David, whose bloodline, according to some interpretations, could be traced down to the Merovingians. The claim was that the Merovingians were the descendants of this ancient and sacred line, which would have made them the rightful kings not only of Europe but of a greater, more sacred empire, one connected to the divine itself. This theory, though tantalizing, has little solid evidence to back it. But it persists, fueled by texts and religious writings that hint at a royal lineage that stretches far beyond the political realities of medieval Europe. Some have even linked the Merovingian bloodline to the fabled Holy Grail, suggesting that the family was in possession of a secret, one that could change the course of Christianity itself. Could the Merovingians have been the guardians of an ancient secret that linked them to the very foundation of Christianity, or even to the blood of Christ himself? The idea that the Merovingians were chosen to protect the Grail or some other sacred artifact has been a powerful source of intrigue, inspiring books, documentaries, and theories that continue to captivate the imagination. Despite these theories, the Merovingian dynasty faced significant challenges in the centuries following their rise to power. Internal conflicts and external pressures eroded their once immense influence. By the 8th century, the family had lost much of its former glory, and in 751, the Merovingians were overthrown by the Carolingians, who would go on to found the Holy Roman Empire under Charlemagne. But even as the dynasty fell from power, the myths surrounding the Merovingian bloodline continued to flourish. One of the most striking aspects of the Merovingians is their mysterious and somewhat disturbing legacy. The family's reign was marked by intrigue, betrayal, and power struggles. The Merovingian kings themselves were often little more than figureheads, their true power held by mayors of the palace and military leaders who had far more influence over the day-to-day affairs of the kingdom. But even within this backdrop of political manipulation and shifting allegiances, the Merovingians managed to retain a certain mystique. They were the last remnants of a lost era, a dynasty that claimed descent from gods and kings long gone. The fall of the Merovingian dynasty is as mysterious as its rise. Although the Carolingians eventually seized the throne, they did so in a manner that involved both political maneuvering and the symbolic erasure of the Merovingians. After the overthrow, the Merovingians were relegated to the status of mere figureheads, and many of their records and symbols were destroyed or hidden away. The destruction of these records was not simply an effort to eliminate the family's power, but a deliberate attempt to sever the connection between the Merovingians and their divine ancestry. This effort to erase their legacy has only fueled the theories about their bloodline, and it has given rise to the idea that they were the keepers of some sacred secret, one that was too dangerous to be allowed to continue. What this secret could have been remains a matter of speculation. Some historians believe that the Merovingians may have been part of a larger, hidden network of rulers who were working to preserve ancient knowledge that could have been dangerous if it fell into the wrong hands. It is possible that the Merovingian kings, as divine figures, were also protectors of ancient wisdom, perhaps knowledge that had been passed down from the ancient world or even from pre-Christian religious traditions. This knowledge may have had the potential to reshape the Christian world, challenging the foundations of the Church and its authority. But as the centuries passed, the Merovingian bloodline faded into the shadows, their story obscured by time and politics. Yet, their legacy continues to resonate. Whether they were the divine rulers they claimed to be, or whether their bloodline was connected to something far more ancient and powerful, the Merovingians remain one of the most fascinating and mysterious royal families in history. The intrigue surrounding their dynasty, their rise to power, and their eventual fall continues to inspire those who search for the hidden secrets of the past. Were they truly the chosen heirs to a divine legacy, or were they simply a product of myth and ambition? The Merovingian story is one that may never be fully understood, but it remains an enduring testament to the mysteries that lie buried in the bloodlines of history. It is one of the oldest and most haunting tales in the world of royal history, the story of a king's heir who was lost to time, a crown passed to another, a dynasty fractured, and a kingdom's future uncertain, all because of a mysterious disappearance. This was not a simple tale of succession or a rival's plot. No, this story goes much deeper, reaching into the shadowy corners of history where whispers of betrayal, fate, and perhaps even something darker linger. The lost heir is a concept that has resonated across cultures and epochs. It's a theme woven into the fabric of many dynasties, from the pharaohs of Egypt to the royal families of medieval Europe. In every case, the missing heir is more than just a person. It's the embodiment of lost potential, a symbolic void that leaves room for speculation, legend, and, in some cases, fear. The loss of an heir creates a ripple effect that extends far beyond the individual. It strikes at the very heart of what a monarchy is: a lineage, a legacy, an unbroken chain that defines power and identity. When that chain is broken, the consequences can be both immediate and far-reaching. The tale of the lost heir in European history is particularly evocative. In the case of England, for instance, there are stories of princes and princesses who vanished without a trace. Some believed to have been murdered, others to have died in mysterious circumstances, and some even thought to have escaped into anonymity. These lost heirs, real or imagined, have inspired generations of storytellers, historians, and conspiracy theorists. The mystery of their disappearance is one of those tantalizing historical puzzles that refuse to be solved. Perhaps the most famous of these stories is that of the princes in the Tower, two young boys, Edward V and his brother Richard, Duke of York, who disappeared in 1483 under the most suspicious of circumstances. What happened to them? Did their uncle, Richard III, have them killed in a bid for the throne? Or were they simply the victims of a political struggle that would shape England for decades to come? Their fates remain one of the great mysteries of British history, with no shortage of theories and no definitive answers. However, it isn't always the threat of political intrigue or royal ambition that results in the disappearance of heirs. In some cases, it is sheer accident, fate, or the result of natural calamities that alters the course of history. Take, for example, the tragic fate of Tsarevich Alexei Nikolaevich of Russia. In the turbulent years following the Russian Revolution, Alexei and his family were imprisoned by the Bolsheviks. The young Tsarevich, heir to the Russian throne, had hemophilia, a condition that made him incredibly vulnerable to injury. During the family's final days in captivity, it is said that Alexei, desperate to escape his captors, tried to flee, only to succumb to the ravages of his illness. His death, though tragic, marked the final blow to the Russian imperial bloodline, which had ruled for more than 3 centuries. Even more chilling is the theory that Alexei was never truly buried with his family. For many years, rumors swirled that his body was secretly hidden away, that his death had been faked, or that he had somehow escaped. The whispers of a missing heir fueled the imagination of many, including those who clung to the hope that Russia's monarchy could one day be restored through this last living descendant. It wasn't until decades later that the remains of Alexei and his family were conclusively identified and interred with their rightful burial. Yet, the legend of the lost Tsarevich endured, part of a long tradition of royal heirs lost to history, leaving only myth in their wake. The lost heir is not always a story of death or disappearance, though. In some cases, it is the existence of the heir that becomes the secret, a secret kept hidden for the protection of the individual or the kingdom. There are many stories throughout history of royal heirs raised in obscurity, their true identities concealed for reasons ranging from political upheaval to the very real threat of assassination. These stories often revolve around the idea that the true heir cannot ascend to the throne because the powers that be fear the strength of their claim. One such story that has captured the public imagination is that of the lost heir of the Merovingian dynasty, a bloodline said to be descended from the biblical King David. This alleged lost heir has captivated historians and mythologists alike, with some arguing that the Merovingians were not simply a ruling family but the guardians of a much older and more powerful secret. According to the legend, the Merovingians were the protectors of a sacred bloodline, the true descendants of Christ, who were meant to rule over Europe. The story suggests that the Merovingians' power was not just political, but deeply spiritual, tied to a divine right that could not be allowed to exist in an age of emerging Christianity. The Merovingians' eventual fall from power, it is said, was orchestrated by the early church, who sought to erase them from history. But what if the bloodline did not die with them? What if an heir was hidden away, raised in secrecy to ensure the survival of this powerful lineage? Such a claim, of course, is steeped in myth, but the idea that royal bloodlines can be erased or hidden away to maintain control has been echoed throughout history. The lost heir is often seen as the ultimate symbol of what could have been, an idealized monarch whose existence would have changed the course of history. The question of whether they lived, and what their legacy might have been, remains unanswered. The mystery of lost heirs is what keeps their legends alive, what makes us imagine a world where they might have ascended to the throne, where they could have ruled, or where their disappearance altered the fate of empires. The emotional weight of the lost heir lies in their potential. The heir is not just a figure of power. They represent hope, renewal, and the possibility of redemption. A monarch is often seen as the embodiment of a nation's future, a figure capable of uniting a fractured realm, restoring order, or realizing the dreams of a kingdom. When an heir is lost, it leaves an indelible scar on the collective memory of a people. The uncertainty of succession, the fear that a rightful ruler has been taken from them, and the loss of a potential savior are all aspects of the drama that unfold when an heir is lost to history. The search for these lost heirs, whether they are presumed dead or simply hidden from view, drives the intrigue surrounding royal bloodlines. Every lost prince, every vanished princess, adds another layer to the rich tapestry of history, one that we continue to unravel today. These lost heirs stir our collective imagination, prompting us to ask, what if they had lived? What would they have done? Could they have changed the world? As the years pass, the legends of these lost heirs only grow. What was once a simple mystery becomes a story of longing and loss. We are drawn to these figures, who exist somewhere between myth and reality, holding on to the faint hope that somewhere in the shadows, an heir to a long-lost throne still waits to be found. And in the end, it is this lingering possibility, the tantalizing thought that perhaps, somewhere, the rightful heir still lives, that keeps the legacy of the lost kings and queens alive in our hearts. Throughout history, there have been moments of profound revelation, where ancient truths hidden from the public eye for centuries are finally brought into the light. These revelations, however, often come with their own set of consequences, for the truth is a double-edged sword. The stories of lost kings and erased bloodlines are not simply matters of curiosity or historical fascination. They are rooted in deeper, often darker, truths about power, secrecy, and the lengths to which empires have gone to control the narrative of history itself. One of the most compelling examples of these hidden truths revolves around the discovery of secret societies, many of which claim ties to ancient royal bloodlines. These secretive organizations, often operating in the shadows of history, have been the subject of countless speculations and theories. One of the most notorious of these societies is the Priory of Chaon, which gained international attention in the late 20th century through the publication of the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. The novel, though fictional, stirred up a wave of interest in the idea that a hidden bloodline, one tied to Jesus Christ, was deliberately suppressed by the Catholic Church and other powerful forces throughout history. The idea that such a bloodline, the true descendants of Christ, was deliberately erased from history by the powers that be is a notion that has captivated the imagination of people around the world. The Priory of Chaon, according to the myth, is said to have been founded in 1099 and tasked with protecting this secret bloodline. But how could such a powerful secret remain hidden for so long? And why would the Church, a powerful institution with vast influence over the hearts and minds of millions, go to such lengths to keep this secret from the world? The answer, according to many conspiracy theorists, lies in the politics of power and control. The Catholic Church, during its rise to dominance in the medieval period, needed to maintain its position as the ultimate authority in religious and political matters. The idea that Christ had descendants who could potentially challenge the Church's claim to spiritual supremacy was too dangerous to allow to exist. This idea gained traction, particularly during times of religious upheaval, such as the Reformation. As the influence of the Church waned, so too did the power of the papacy, and thus the desire to keep the bloodline hidden became even more urgent. This concept is not unique to the Western world. In other parts of the world, particularly in the East, the idea of hidden royal bloodlines has also played a significant role in shaping the course of history. One of the most fascinating and mysterious of these stories is that of the bloodline of Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, the legendary founder of the Mongol Empire, is considered one of the most successful conquerors in history. His empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, and his descendants, the so-called Golden Family, ruled over vast swathes of Asia for centuries. Yet, despite his monumental success, Much about Genghis Khan's personal life and his descendants remains shrouded in mystery. According to some accounts, Genghis Khan's bloodline was so sacred that it was kept secret from the public for centuries. The belief in the sanctity of his bloodline was so strong that it is said that his descendants, the Khans of the Mongol Empire, were revered as divine rulers, with an almost otherworldly connection to the heavens. But as the centuries passed, this belief in the divine right of the Khans began to fade. The empire fractured, and the Khans were no longer seen as divine, but rather as just rulers like any other. Yet, the notion of the sacred Mongol bloodline persists. Some historians claim that certain descendants of Genghis Khan's family still exist today, though their identities are unknown to the public. The legend of these lost heirs to the Mongol Empire has been kept alive by secretive families and ancient organizations, who claim to possess the knowledge of the bloodline's true descendants. The idea that Genghis Khan's heirs still live, hidden in the shadows of history, is an alluring one, full of mystery and intrigue. It raises questions about the nature of royal bloodlines and the lengths to which powerful families will go to preserve their legacy. This fascination with hidden bloodlines extends far beyond the Mongol Empire and Christian myths. In fact, the search for lost royal families and the heirs to forgotten thrones has been a constant theme in the historical record. One of the most dramatic and mysterious of these cases is the story of the lost heirs of the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine Empire, the eastern continuation of the Roman Empire, was once the heart of civilization. But after its fall in 1453 to the Ottoman Turks, the empire and its royal bloodline were thought to have disappeared from history. However, much like the lost kings of Egypt and the Merovingians, the heirs to the Byzantine Empire may not have disappeared at all. Some historians believe that there were surviving members of the Byzantine royal family who managed to escape the Ottomans and went into hiding, living in secret for centuries. These hidden heirs, it is said, continued to carry the bloodline of the Byzantine emperors, preserving a legacy that could have altered the course of history if it had been revealed. The mystery of these lost bloodlines, however, is not merely academic. It has real-world consequences, particularly in the realm of political power. The preservation of royal bloodlines has often been central to the power structures of empires and kingdoms. In many cases, royal families have used their bloodlines as a way to solidify their control over vast territories. By claiming descent from divine or legendary figures, these families legitimized their rule, asserting that their power was not just a matter of political maneuvering, but of cosmic destiny. But what happens when these bloodlines are lost or hidden? What happens when the right to rule is denied to those who are believed to have inherited it? In some cases, it creates a vacuum, one that is filled by rival claimants and power struggles. The loss of a bloodline can set off a chain reaction, resulting in war, chaos, and the eventual reshaping of political landscapes. It is often in these moments of political upheaval that new dynasties rise and old ones fall, leaving behind a legacy that may or may not have been the one originally intended by history. The fascination with lost bloodlines is also a reflection of our collective desire for continuity and certainty. In a world filled with change, we seek the comforting idea that the bloodlines of kings, queens, and emperors are somehow eternal, that they connect the past with the present, and that they hold the key to understanding the true nature of power. The idea that we are all connected to these ancient families, either through blood or through legacy, provides a sense of continuity that transcends time. But there is a darker side to this quest for lost bloodlines. The very act of erasing these families from the historical record, or of hiding them away from the public, speaks to the lengths to which those in power will go to maintain their hold on authority. It suggests a world where the truth is manipulated, hidden, and obscured, where power is maintained not through transparency or legitimacy, but through secrecy, manipulation, and sometimes outright lies. The search for these lost bloodlines, then, is not just a search for history, it is a search for the truth about who controls history and why they have chosen to conceal it. The truth of these lost royal families, and the secretive bloodlines that run through them, remains one of the great mysteries of history. Whether they are buried beneath the sands of time, hidden in secret vaults, or erased from the record altogether, they continue to haunt us. The search for these lost heirs is not just a journey into the past. It is a search for understanding, for power, and for the very nature of what it means to be part of a royal lineage, a legacy that endures through centuries of secrecy, betrayal, and history itself. In the annals of history, few figures have sparked as much intrigue and debate as the kings and rulers of the ancient world. These men and women, born into bloodlines that were seen as sacred or divine, ruled vast empires and changed the course of history with their actions. But beneath the surface of their power, there lies a more complex story, one of mystery, hidden agendas, and often betrayal. As we peel back the layers of time, we discover that these rulers were not just political figures. They were symbols of something much larger, something that transcended the mere politics of their time. They were, in many ways, the embodiment of an ancient truth, one that was carefully guarded by those who sought to preserve their bloodlines and the power they conferred. One of the most powerful and enduring legacies of ancient royal bloodlines is the story of Alexander the Great. Born in 356 BCE, Alexander became one of history's most famous conquerors, creating an empire that stretched from Greece to Egypt and all the way to India. His military genius is still studied today, and his name is synonymous with greatness. Yet, what is perhaps more fascinating than his conquests is the mystery surrounding his birth and his claim to divine ancestry. Alexander was the son of King Philip II of Macedon and Queen Olympias, but many ancient sources suggest that his true father may have been the god Zeus himself. The story goes that Olympias, in a dream, was visited by the god in the form of a snake, and from that union, Alexander was conceived. This divine parentage was not just a matter of royal propaganda, it was a central part of Alexander's identity. Throughout his life, he portrayed himself as a god on earth, a living incarnation of divine power. His bloodline, then, was not just a royal one, it was a bloodline that connected him to the very gods of Greek mythology. This connection gave him the legitimacy to rule over vast territories and to command the loyalty of his soldiers. But it also made him a target for those who sought to challenge his authority. The idea that Alexander's bloodline was divine gave rise to both awe and fear. It allowed him to maintain his hold over his empire, but it also placed him in the crosshairs of those who wished to destroy him or claim his legacy for themselves. The question of divine bloodlines is not unique to Alexander. Throughout history, there have been countless rulers who claimed divine or semi-divine ancestry. The emperors of China, for example, believed themselves to be the descendants of the Yellow Emperor, the legendary figure who founded Chinese civilization. The Japanese imperial family, which claims to be the oldest continuing hereditary monarchy in the world, traces its lineage back to the sun goddess Amaterasu, who is said to have given birth to the first emperor, Emperor Jimmu. In both of these cases, the divine right to rule was not just a matter of political authority. It was a matter of cosmic destiny. These rulers were seen as intermediaries between the gods and the people, and their bloodlines were thought to carry the power to maintain harmony and order in the world. But what happens when these bloodlines are broken? What happens when the divine right to rule is challenged, or when a ruler is unable to produce a legitimate heir? The answer, as history has shown time and again, is that the consequences can be dire. In many cases, the breakdown of a royal bloodline leads to chaos, civil war, and the eventual collapse of an empire or dynasty. One of the most famous examples of this is the fall of the Roman Empire. The Roman emperors, who were once seen as the embodiments of divine power, were eventually stripped of their divine authority as the empire crumbled under the weight of internal strife, economic collapse, and barbarian invasions. As the Roman Empire fell, the question of succession became more pressing. With no clear heir to the throne, rival factions vied for control, each claiming to be the rightful successor to the emperors of Rome. The absence of a strong, legitimate bloodline led to instability and conflict, and by the time the Western Roman Empire fell in 476 CE, the idea of divine bloodlines and the authority they conferred had been shattered. The fall of Rome was not just the end of an empire, it was the end of an era in which bloodlines were seen as the foundation of political power. In the centuries that followed, the concept of royal bloodlines continued to play a central role in the politics of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Yet, as the world changed, so too did the meaning of these bloodlines. The rise of monarchies, empires, and dynasties across the globe was often built on the foundation of divine or legendary ancestry. But as these monarchies faced internal struggles, foreign invasions, and the pressures of modernity, the strength of their bloodlines was increasingly called into question. One of the most striking examples of this shift in perception occurred during the reign of King Louis XIV of France, known as the Sun King. Louis XIV ruled France for over 70 years, making him one of the longest-reigning monarchs in history. His reign is often seen as the epitome of absolute monarchy, with the king serving as the embodiment of the state itself. For Louis, his bloodline was a symbol of his divine right to rule. He was descended from the great medieval kings of France, and his court was a reflection of his status as the ruler of Europe's most powerful nation. But beneath the glittering surface of Louis XIV's reign, there were cracks in the foundation of his dynasty. The Sun King had no legitimate male heirs, and as a result, the question of succession became a matter of national importance. Louis's attempts to secure his bloodline were fraught with difficulty. His eldest son, Louis le Dauphin, died young, leaving behind only a series of younger heirs, each of whom was frail or sickly. The death of Louis XIV in 1715 marked the end of an era, and with it came the uncertainty of succession. The French throne, once seen as an unshakable symbol of divine right, was now in jeopardy, and France would soon find itself embroiled in political turmoil that would lead to the French Revolution. The instability of the French monarchy highlights the inherent fragility of royal bloodlines. No matter how powerful or divine a bloodline may seem, it is always susceptible to the ravages of time, illness, and political upheaval. The very idea of divine right, which had once been the bedrock of royal power, began to lose its grip on the public imagination. As the Enlightenment swept across Europe, ideas about governance shifted, and the notion that a king or queen's bloodline could be the ultimate source of authority began to fade. By the time of the French Revolution in 1789, the idea of divine right was no longer tenable. The French monarchy was overthrown, and with it, the centuries-old belief that royal bloodlines were divinely ordained to rule. This shift in perception would have far-reaching consequences for the royal families of Europe and beyond. The question of bloodlines continued to play a crucial role in the politics of European monarchies, but increasingly, it became clear that bloodlines alone could not guarantee political legitimacy. As new forms of government emerged, monarchies were forced to adapt or face extinction. In some cases, royal families were able to maintain their influence by adapting to the changing political landscape, as in the case of the British monarchy, which gradually shifted from absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy. In others, the end of the royal bloodline marked the end of an era, as happened with the Russian monarchy after the Russian Revolution of 1917. Today, the concept of royal bloodlines continues to fascinate, but it is no longer seen as the sole source of political authority. The power of these bloodlines may still carry symbolic weight, but it no longer holds the same practical significance it once did. Monarchies have become largely ceremonial institutions, with the true power residing in democratic governments and constitutional systems. Yet, the mystique of royal bloodlines endures. The idea that a royal family carries within its veins the blood of gods, heroes, or legendary ancestors continues to captivate our collective imagination. In the end, the story of royal bloodlines is not just a tale of kings and queens, but a reflection of the way in which power is passed down through generations, shaped by myth, legend, and the complex interplay of politics and history. These bloodlines, once seen as divine and unassailable, are now the subject of historical inquiry and modern-day intrigue. As we continue to explore the mysteries of the past, we are reminded that the truth of royal bloodlines, like the rulers themselves, is often more complicated and elusive than we might have imagined. Throughout history, the rise and fall of kingdoms and empires have been driven by the power of bloodlines. It is not simply the might of an army or the brilliance of a leader that defines the success of a dynasty, but rather the legacy that is passed down from one generation to the next. Royal bloodlines have often been regarded as the ultimate source of power, intertwined with divine right, mythology, and destiny. These bloodlines carried with them not only the weight of authority but also the deep, often dark, secrets of the past. What happens when the true nature of these bloodlines is called into question? When the very legitimacy of a royal lineage is challenged? And when the mythos surrounding it begins to unravel? One of the most enduring symbols of this mystery is the question of the Holy Grail and its connection to royal bloodlines. The Grail, a legendary object said to possess miraculous powers, has been the subject of countless myths, religious texts, and, more recently, conspiracy theories. The idea that the Grail was not merely a physical object, but a symbol of a sacred bloodline, has captured the imagination of many. According to some theories, the Holy Grail is not just the cup that Christ drank from at the Last Supper, but the bloodline of Jesus Christ himself. In this narrative, Christ's descendants are said to have carried on his bloodline in secret, hidden away to protect them from the forces that sought to destroy them. This secret bloodline, some claim, was passed down through royal families, including the Merovingians, a dynasty that ruled over the Franks in early medieval France. The idea that the blood of Christ could have been passed down through the centuries, hidden within the veins of European royalty, is a tantalizing theory that continues to stir debate. The Merovingians, in particular, are at the center of this theory. The family, which ruled much of Gaul from the 5th to the 8th centuries, is often cited as the keepers of this secret royal bloodline. The Merovingian kings, it is claimed, were not just rulers, but protectors of the bloodline of Christ. They were said to have been chosen by divine right, not only to rule over the Franks but also to safeguard the sacred legacy of Christ's descendants. This connection between the Merovingians and the Holy Grail is not new. In fact, it can be traced back to medieval texts, which hinted at the family's divine ancestry and its role in protecting a holy and powerful secret. According to these stories, the Merovingians were the direct descendants of Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene, and they held the key to a great secret that could change the course of history. This bloodline was said to have been hidden away, protected by secret societies and buried beneath layers of history and myth. The legend of the Merovingians and their connection to the Grail was given a modern twist with the publication of The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail in 1982. This book, along with the more famous The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown, popularized the idea that the bloodline of Jesus Christ had survived into the present day, and that it had been kept hidden by powerful forces throughout history. According to these works, the Merovingians were the guardians of this sacred bloodline, and their descendants, though scattered throughout Europe, could still be found today. The idea of a hidden royal bloodline that has been deliberately suppressed by the powers that be is one of the most compelling and provocative elements of this theory. If such a bloodline exists, it raises profound questions about the true nature of power and the lengths to which people will go to maintain control over history. This theory, while controversial, is part of a larger tradition of belief in hidden royal bloodlines that stretches across history. In addition to the Merovingians, there are countless other examples of royal families and dynasties that have been said to possess divine or mysterious bloodlines. Some claim that the ancient Egyptian pharaohs, for example, were not merely rulers of Egypt, but descended from gods. The concept of the divine right of kings is rooted in the belief that these monarchs were chosen by the gods themselves to rule over their people. In many cultures, royal bloodlines were seen as a direct link between the mortal realm and the divine, a sacred connection that gave these rulers the authority to govern with divine sanction. But as with all things tied to power, these bloodlines were not always so easily accepted. Throughout history, there have been efforts to erase or conceal certain royal bloodlines, particularly when those bloodlines were seen as a threat to the existing order. The most famous case of this kind of erasure is the fate of the children of the Romanovs, the last imperial family of Russia. In 1917, the Russian Revolution brought an end to the Romanov dynasty, and the family was imprisoned by the Bolsheviks. In 1918, Tsar Nicholas II and his family were executed in Ekaterinburg, and their bodies were buried in a mass grave. For decades, rumors persisted that one of the Romanov children, Anastasia, had survived the execution and was living in exile. The mystery of Anastasia's fate captivated the world, and it wasn't until the 2000s that DNA evidence confirmed that the entire Romanov family had been killed. However, the story of Anastasia and her potential survival continues to inspire speculation. Was there a hidden heir to the Romanov throne? Could the bloodline of the Romanovs have been secretly preserved, waiting for the right moment to emerge and reclaim the throne? The fate of the Romanovs is not the only example of a royal family whose bloodline was erased or hidden away. In many cases, royal heirs were deliberately removed from the public eye for political reasons. During the medieval period, when kings and queens were often embroiled in battles for power, it was not uncommon for heirs to be kept hidden away, either to protect them from assassination or to prevent rival factions from using them as symbols of rebellion. In some cases, these hidden heirs were raised in secret, their true identities concealed until the time was right for them to claim their inheritance. The story of the lost princes of England, Edward V and his brother Richard, who disappeared from the Tower of London in 1483, is one of the most famous examples of this type of royal mystery. Their disappearance has fueled centuries of speculation, with many theories suggesting that they were murdered by their uncle, Richard III, in a bid for the throne. But others believe that the princes may have survived, and that their bloodline was preserved in secret. The legend of the lost heir is not limited to Europe. In Asia, there are stories of hidden heirs to powerful dynasties, some of whom were thought to have disappeared under mysterious circumstances. In China, for example, the last emperor of the Qing dynasty, Puyi, was removed from the throne in 1912, and the imperial family was forced into exile. For many years, rumors circulated that a member of the Qing family had survived and was living in secret, waiting for the right moment to reclaim the throne. Similarly, in Japan, the imperial family, which claims to be the oldest hereditary monarchy in the world, has been the subject of numerous conspiracy theories. Some believe that the true heir to the Japanese throne is someone other than the current emperor, and that the bloodline has been kept hidden for centuries. The fascination with hidden royal bloodlines is not merely a product of modern conspiracy theories or popular fiction. It is rooted in the deep human need to believe in something greater than ourselves, something that transcends the mundane world of politics and power. The idea that a royal bloodline could be hidden, suppressed, or erased taps into our collective yearning for mystery, for the idea that there is more to history than meets the eye. Whether it is the Merovingians, the Romanovs, or any of the countless other dynasties that have shaped the course of history, the search for hidden bloodlines continues to captivate our imaginations. The truth, however, may be far less glamorous than the legends that surround these royal families. In many cases, the hidden bloodlines are simply a product of political necessity, power struggles, and the efforts of those in power to control the narrative of history. But the allure of the lost heir, the forgotten king or queen, remains a powerful force. It is a symbol of lost potential, of what could have been, and of the mysteries that lie buried beneath the surface of history. The search for these hidden bloodlines is not just about uncovering the truth of the past. It is about understanding the forces that shaped the world we live in today. There is something deeply compelling about the notion of lost dynasties, bloodlines that were erased or concealed for reasons that remain, in some cases, inscrutable. These forgotten lineages are not simply the casualties of political strife, rebellion, or war. They represent a more profound cultural erasure, the deliberate removal of something once thought sacred. The idea that entire bloodlines, once tied to kings, queens, or even gods, could vanish from history sparks both fascination and unease. What was it that led to their erasure? Why were these bloodlines hidden, and who stood to benefit from their disappearance? The search for answers to these questions has kept historians, conspiracy theorists, and everyday people alike captivated for centuries. The concept of royal bloodlines being erased or concealed is not a modern phenomenon. It's a theme that echoes through the corridors of history, present in some of the world's most enduring mysteries. Many royal families have hidden their most sensitive secrets behind veils of deception, whether through deliberate suppression or through circumstances that led to the loss of a legitimate heir. This story, in one form or another, repeats itself across continents and cultures. One such story lies in the heart of the ancient world, where the pharaohs of Egypt were believed to be the living gods on earth, their bloodlines a direct link to the divine. For centuries, the ancient Egyptians believed that the pharaohs were not simply rulers, but intermediaries between the gods and the people. The bloodlines of the pharaohs were seen as sacred, and their ability to rule was not just a matter of political power, but of cosmic right. The ancient Egyptians believed that the king was a divine figure whose role was essential to maintaining the order of the universe, ensuring that the natural and cosmic forces remained in balance. This idea of divine kingship was encapsulated in the belief that the pharaoh was the embodiment of Horus, the god of the sky and the protector of the Egyptian people. But despite the grandeur of this belief system, the history of Egypt's royal bloodlines is one of tumult, usurpation, and forced disappearances. The most famous example of such a bloodline being erased is the story of the heretic pharaoh, Akhenaten. Akhenaten, who ruled Egypt during the 14th century BCE, is one of the most enigmatic figures in Egyptian history. He attempted to radically shift Egyptian religious practices, focusing the worship of Egypt's gods on the singular deity, Aten. His attempts to break with centuries of tradition, though, were deeply controversial, and upon his death, his successors moved quickly to erase his memory from history. His temples were dismantled, his statues defaced, and his name erased from royal inscriptions. Even his tomb was abandoned, and his legacy was forgotten for centuries. What makes Akhenaten's story particularly fascinating is that it raises questions about the nature of royal bloodlines. Why would the memory of a ruler be so deliberately wiped from history? Akhenaten's bloodline was not, after all, the product of a sudden usurpation or a coup. It was a royal lineage, one that stretched back through Egypt's most famous pharaohs, including his father, Amenhotep III. And yet, when Akhenaten's religious reforms failed, his heirs, most notably his son Tutankhamun, sought to undo his actions and restore the old order. After Tutankhamun's death, a concerted effort was made to erase Akhenaten's name, to discredit his reign, and to ensure that his family line would not continue. In essence, Akhenaten's bloodline was deliberately erased from the history of Egypt, and the royal family was reshaped in such a way that it was as if Akhenaten had never existed at all. But Akhenaten's case is not unique. Throughout history, royal families have sought to control the narrative of their own existence, erasing inconvenient figures or families from the public memory. In the ancient world, it was not uncommon for rulers to actively suppress the names of their predecessors, particularly those who were seen as illegitimate or who were overthrown in a coup. The Roman Empire, for example, saw many emperors who were erased from official histories, either due to their unpopularity, their failure, or the threat they posed to the reigning emperor. The process of damnatio memoriae, or the condemnation of memory, was a common practice in ancient Rome, where the names and deeds of certain emperors were deliberately wiped from public records. This was not just about erasing names from history, it was about eliminating any trace of their legitimacy. In medieval Europe, the concept of erasing royal bloodlines took on a different form. In the feudal system, the concept of inheritance and legitimacy was central to the stability of the monarchy. Yet, this very system also led to widespread political intrigue, with monarchs often being overthrown, exiled, or even murdered to make room for new bloodlines to rise. The fall of the Plantagenets and the War of the Roses in 15th century England is a case in point. The Plantagenet dynasty, which had ruled England for over 3 centuries, was torn apart by internal strife, as rival factions within the royal family fought for control of the throne. The eventual winner, Henry Tudor, who would become Henry VII, claimed the throne not through a direct bloodline to the Plantagenets but through his mother's side. In fact, many of the claims to the throne during this period were tenuous at best, relying more on political maneuvering and military victories than on legitimate bloodlines. The murder of the young princes in the Tower of London, Edward V and his brother Richard, remains one of the great mysteries of English history. Were they killed by their uncle, Richard III, in a bid to consolidate power? Or did they survive, hidden away to live out their lives in secrecy? The questions surrounding their fate have fueled centuries of speculation, with no definitive answers ever being found. In the case of the Tudor dynasty, the desire to maintain a legitimate bloodline was paramount. Henry VII, the first Tudor king, had no royal bloodline to speak of and was considered a usurper by many of his contemporaries. His marriage to Elizabeth of York, the daughter of the last Plantagenet king, Richard III, was a political move designed to unite the warring factions and legitimize his claim to the throne. This union, however, did not come without its own complications. The birth of Henry VIII, whose reign would lead to the establishment of the Church of England, was seen by many as the continuation of a powerful royal bloodline, but it was also a moment of profound uncertainty. Henry VIII's struggles to secure a male heir, his break with the Catholic Church, and his numerous marriages were all driven by the desire to protect the Tudor bloodline and ensure its survival. But even the Tudor bloodline was not immune to the ravages of time and power struggles. After the death of Henry VIII, his children struggled to maintain the strength of the Tudor legacy. Edward VI died young, and Mary I, the first queen to rule England in her own right, had no surviving heirs. Finally, Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, left no heir at all. The death of Elizabeth marked the end of the Tudor dynasty and the beginning of the Stuart reign, once again raising questions about the legitimacy of royal succession. The shifting tides of royal bloodlines in England demonstrated how fragile the concept of royal legitimacy truly was, and how easily entire lineages could be lost to time or manipulated for political gain. The fate of hidden royal bloodlines is not limited to Europe. Across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, the idea of lost heirs and concealed dynasties runs deep. In China, the last imperial family, the Qing dynasty, was toppled in 1912, and the last emperor, Huai, was forced into exile. For years, rumors swirled that a hidden heir to the Qing throne was waiting for the right moment to emerge and reclaim the monarchy. Similarly, in Japan, the imperial family, which traces its lineage back over 2,000 years, has seen its own share of intrigue and speculation. The idea of a hidden heir, someone who carries the true bloodline of a powerful dynasty, remains an enduring symbol of mystery, power, and the fragility of royal authority. Across the world, the idea that royal bloodlines could be lost, hidden, or erased continues to captivate our imaginations. Whether through political necessity, royal intrigue, or the sheer whim of fate, the stories of these lost or hidden bloodlines remain some of the most enduring mysteries in history. These royal families, once the bearers of immense power and influence, leave behind a legacy of intrigue, secrets, and unanswered questions. As we look back on their history, we are left to wonder, what would the world have been like if these bloodlines had not been erased? What might have been the legacy of these lost kings and queens if they had not been hidden away, forgotten, or destroyed? These questions will continue to haunt us long after the pages of history have turned. The shadow of lost royal bloodlines stretches far beyond the fading records of kings and queens, surviving not only in historical texts, but also in the very fabric of modern folklore, conspiracy theories, and the collective human psyche. It seems as though there is an almost intrinsic human desire to uncover what has been hidden, to bring to light what has been buried beneath layers of history, power struggles, and secrets. The allure of a hidden royal lineage is more than just the fascination with the aristocracy. It taps into a deeper, almost primordial, need to understand how power is passed down through generations and to confront the darker aspects of history that are often left unsaid. At the heart of this intrigue is the question, why do some bloodlines disappear from history, while others seem to endure, no matter the odds? This question is not only about the fading fortunes of dynasties or the political machinations that shape their destinies. It is about the very nature of legacy itself. The persistence of royal bloodlines, those that survive and those that vanish, can be seen as a reflection of how societies, cultures, and entire civilizations choose to shape their histories and legacies. One of the most fascinating and complex examples of royal bloodlines that have both endured and been suppressed is that of the Merovingian dynasty. These early French kings, ruling from the 5th to the 8th centuries, were believed by some to be direct descendants of the Christ-like figure of the biblical Mary Magdalene and Jesus Christ. This theory, popularized by works such as the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail and the Da Vinci Code, suggests that the Merovingians carried within their veins the sacred bloodline of Christ himself. According to this theory, the Merovingians were not merely powerful kings, but guardians of a secret that could shake the foundations of Christianity itself. What makes the Merovingian story so compelling is not just the idea of a hidden bloodline, but also the circumstances surrounding the dynasty's eventual downfall. The Merovingians, despite their early dominance in the Frankish kingdoms, were gradually overshadowed by the rise of the Carolingians, another powerful family that would ultimately assume the mantle of power in France. The most famous of the Carolingians was Charlemagne, whose reign would define the medieval period in Europe. However, the Merovingians did not simply fall from grace due to internal strife or military defeats. There was a concerted effort by the Carolingians to erase the Merovingian legacy, removing their name from the official records and suppressing any memory of their reign. The idea that such a bloodline, tied to both political power and religious significance, could be buried so thoroughly raises troubling questions about the nature of history itself. Was the removal of the Merovingian dynasty a result of political rivalry, or was there something more sinister at play? Was the bloodline's potential to disrupt the established order of the church and the monarchy too dangerous to allow to endure? These are questions that have fascinated historians and theorists for centuries. Yet the true reasons for the Merovingians' fall may never be fully understood. The erasure of royal bloodlines was not, of course, limited to the Merovingians or even to the medieval period. Throughout history, powerful families have been deliberately silenced, their names and legacies lost to time, often due to political necessity or religious conflict. The most infamous example of this is the Romanovs, the last royal family of Russia. In 1917, the Russian Revolution brought an end to centuries of imperial rule. Tsar Nicholas II and his family were imprisoned and eventually executed by Bolshevik forces in 1918. For decades, rumors persisted that one or more of the Romanov children had survived, particularly Anastasia, the youngest daughter. This myth was perpetuated by reports of Anastasia impostors, who claimed to be the lost princess, most notably Anna Anderson, a woman who spent years in Germany and the United States claiming to be Anastasia. The mystery surrounding Anastasia's potential survival was not just a tale of a royal bloodline preserved against all odds, but also a reflection of the profound cultural and emotional attachment that people had to the Russian imperial family. The Romanovs had ruled Russia for over 3 centuries, and their sudden and brutal end left a vacuum that many wanted to fill with hope. The idea that a royal heir could have survived, hidden away from the revolutionary forces, offered a form of continuity. A belief that the bloodline of Russia's imperial rulers could yet endure, even if their political power had been shattered. The mystery was finally put to rest in the 2000s when DNA testing confirmed that all the Romanovs had been executed and buried in a mass grave. However, the unresolved question of the Romanovs highlights something much more profound: the idea that royal bloodlines are more than mere symbols of political power. For many, these bloodlines represent the continuity of a nation's identity, its culture, and its sense of destiny. To lose a royal family is, in many ways, to lose a part of that nation's soul. The preservation of a bloodline, even if hidden or lost, speaks to a desire for something timeless, something eternal, a connection to a past that continues to shape the present. But what happens when a royal bloodline is erased not by revolution or warfare, but by a systematic campaign of suppression? In many cases, royal families or their heirs have been deliberately hidden away, not just to protect them from assassination, but to maintain control over the legitimacy of the throne. In the case of the British monarchy, the mysterious disappearance of the so-called lost princes in the Tower of London remains one of the most enduring royal mysteries. Edward V and his brother Richard, the sons of King Edward IV, were imprisoned in the Tower in 1483, but they were never seen again. While the official story states that the boys were murdered by their uncle Richard III, many historians and conspiracy theorists continue to suggest that they were hidden away, perhaps living out their lives in secrecy. Their bloodline preserved, but their identities concealed. The disappearance of the princes is not just a mystery of murder. It is a mystery of power. Their disappearance and the potential survival of their bloodline would have had far-reaching political consequences. If the princes had survived, they could have challenged Richard III's claim to the throne, and perhaps even prevented the rise of the Tudor dynasty. This fear of competing bloodlines, and the potential legitimacy they could bestow upon rival claimants, was one of the driving forces behind many acts of political intrigue, murder, and erasure throughout history. The idea of a royal bloodline being hidden or erased also raises questions about the nature of succession. In many cultures, the concept of royal blood was sacred, and it was believed that only those with direct ancestral ties to the divine or legendary kings could hold power. But as we have seen throughout history, the desire to control succession has led to many royal bloodlines being distorted, suppressed, or even erased entirely. This manipulation of bloodlines was not simply a matter of political rivalry. It was a way of ensuring that power remained in the hands of those who were able to control it, often at great cost. Even in the modern era, the notion of lost or hidden royal bloodlines continues to capture the public imagination. The continuing interest in the British royal family, despite its relatively symbolic role in the modern world, is a testament to the enduring allure of royal bloodlines. The fascination with Prince Harry and his supposed discontent with the royal family, for example, reflects the continued cultural attachment to the idea of royal legitimacy and inheritance. Even in a world where the political power of monarchs has diminished significantly, the symbolism of royal bloodlines persists as a form of national identity and historical continuity. The idea of lost or hidden bloodlines also persists in popular culture. Movies, books, and television shows that explore the concept of royal heirs living in secret or lost heirs emerging from obscurity are a popular trope. From the Cinderella stories of long-lost princesses to the more contemporary thrillers involving hidden royal legacies. These stories resonate with audiences because they reflect a deep-seated desire for continuity, for the preservation of something sacred, and for the idea that the past continues to shape the present in ways that are not always visible to the naked eye. Ultimately, the enduring fascination with lost royal bloodlines speaks to something deeper about human nature. The need to understand who we are, where we come from, and the ways in which our past shapes our future. The search for hidden heirs and concealed dynasties is not just about uncovering ancient secrets or solving long-forgotten mysteries. It is about our collective desire to connect with something larger than ourselves, to find meaning in the bloodlines that have shaped the world we live in today. Whether these bloodlines are real or imagined, their stories continue to captivate, reminding us of the power of legacy, the fragility of dynasties, and the eternal allure of the unknown. Throughout the history of royal families, the notion of hidden legacies and erased bloodlines has often played a pivotal role in shaping the world's most dramatic and transformative events. While much of history is defined by the public and the visible, by kings and queens whose actions are chronicled in the annals of time, there are countless others whose legacies were deliberately obscured, forgotten, or suppressed. These hidden bloodlines are more than just the forgotten heirs of once great families. They are symbols of lost power, the untold stories that, if revealed, could rewrite the very course of history. The question of what happened to these royal bloodlines and why they were hidden is an unsettling one. Often, the circumstances surrounding the erasure of royal families were driven by political necessity, the desire to consolidate power, or religious conflicts that deemed certain legacies a threat to the status quo. The stories of lost heirs, those whose fates remain shrouded in mystery, are among the most intriguing and unsettling elements of history. They are the echoes of dynasties that failed, empires that crumbled, and families whose bloodlines were considered dangerous, either to rulers in power or to the religious authorities of the time. Take, for example, the tragic story of the Romanovs, Russia's last imperial family, whose ultimate demise at the hands of the Bolsheviks marked the end of over 3 centuries of autocratic rule. The execution of Tsar Nicholas II and his family in 1918 was not just the end of an empire, but the end of a dynasty whose bloodline had once been synonymous with the imperial might of Russia. The brutal deaths of Nicholas, his wife Alexandra, and their children, including the young princess Anastasia, were designed to sever the link between the monarchy and the Russian people, to erase the very notion that a royal family could or should continue to govern in the wake of revolution. Yet, despite the Bolsheviks' efforts to eliminate the Romanovs entirely, rumors quickly emerged that one or more members of the royal family had survived. The mystery of Anastasia's potential survival captured the public imagination for decades. It became a symbol of hope for many who refused to believe that the monarchy could simply be wiped out, that the bloodline of Russia's imperial rulers could be erased from existence. For years, women claimed to be Anastasia, the most famous of whom, Anna Anderson, spent years in Germany and the United States attempting to prove her royal lineage. While DNA tests later confirmed the execution of the entire Romanov family, the enduring belief that the bloodline could somehow continue remained a powerful testament to the public's attachment to the Romanov dynasty and their unshakable belief in the importance of royal bloodlines in shaping national identity. The story of the Romanovs is not an isolated case. It is part of a broader pattern in which royal families, when overthrown or destroyed, leave behind not only a political void but a cultural and emotional one as well. The fate of the lost heirs, the hidden royal children, or the secret survivors of dynasties, seems to strike a deep chord within societies. This feeling is rooted in the collective belief that certain families, due to their bloodlines, hold a kind of intrinsic right to rule. When these royal families fall, their stories are not just about political collapse, but also about the destruction of a connection to the past, one that seems to transcend the mere politics of the moment. The erasure of royal bloodlines can also be seen in other parts of the world, where royal families face suppression not just from revolutionaries but from other forces intent on reshaping their countries. In Japan, for example, the imperial family, though never overthrown in the way the Romanovs were, has been subject to its own unique form of suppression. The Japanese imperial family claims the longest continuous hereditary monarchy in the world, tracing its lineage back over 2 millennia. The myth of the Japanese emperor's divine right, linked to the sun goddess Amaterasu, is one of the most powerful and enduring aspects of Japan's royal heritage. However, this divine bloodline faced significant challenges during World War II, when Japan's Emperor Hirohito was forced to renounce his divinity following Japan's defeat in 1945. The post-war occupation and the subsequent dismantling of Japan's imperial system left the emperor's divine status in tatters. The modern Japanese royal family is now largely symbolic, with its political influence restricted to ceremonial duties. While the imperial family continues to be revered by many in Japan, it remains an institution that has undergone profound changes, particularly regarding its bloodline's divine connection. The loss of the emperor's godlike status is symbolic of the shifting role that royal bloodlines have played in the modern world, a transformation that, for many, represents the collapse of an ancient and sacred tradition. But the most profound mysteries are often those bloodlines that were never allowed to flourish, those heirs who were erased before they had a chance to rule. In Europe, for instance, the story of the lost princes of the Tower of London has captivated generations of historians and mystery lovers alike. Edward V and his younger brother Richard were the sons of King Edward IV and were heirs to the English throne in the late 15th century. However, after their father's death, the 2 young princes were imprisoned in the Tower of London by their uncle, Richard III, who later declared himself king. The boys were never seen again, and many theories abound regarding their fate. Some believe they were murdered by Richard III, while others have suggested that the princes were secretly hidden away to protect them from potential rivals. What became of them remains one of history's great unresolved mysteries. The story of the lost princes is not just a historical curiosity. It is a reflection of the deep-seated belief in the sanctity of royal bloodlines. These boys were not merely children. They were the embodiment of the future of the Plantagenet dynasty. Their potential to reign, to continue their bloodline, was abruptly and mysteriously halted, and their disappearance marked the end of an era in English history. The intrigue surrounding their death speaks not only to the fragility of royal power but also to the enduring human need to hold on to the past, to believe that the bloodline of a king or queen carries with it the power to shape the future. It is perhaps this attachment to the idea of royal bloodlines, this idea that power, legitimacy, and destiny are passed down through generations of rulers, that makes these stories of lost or hidden heirs so compelling. In many ways, the fate of these hidden bloodlines speaks to a broader human desire for continuity, for the preservation of something timeless and eternal. The erasure of a bloodline, particularly one that carries with it a perceived divine right or sacred duty, challenges the very concept of what it means to rule. When these bloodlines are destroyed or obscured, it raises profound questions about the legitimacy of power, about what happens when a royal legacy is interrupted, and what forces, whether political, social, or religious, have the power to erase it entirely. In modern times, these stories of lost heirs and hidden dynasties have been transformed into cultural touchstones, finding their way into novels, films, and documentaries. Whether it is the romance of a long-lost princess, the mystery of an heir who survives against all odds, or the conspiracy theories surrounding royal families, the fascination with hidden royal bloodlines continues to thrive. The question remains, however, why are we so drawn to these stories? Perhaps it is because they speak to a universal desire for continuity, for the belief that something greater than ourselves can endure the ravages of time, fate, and political upheaval. In the end, these bloodlines, whether they were erased by revolutionaries, conspirators, or the passage of time itself, remind us of the fragility of legacy. They serve as a warning that power, no matter how entrenched, is vulnerable to the forces of history. But they also serve as a testament to the enduring nature of human belief in the sacredness of bloodlines. Even when royal families fall, even when their bloodlines are buried beneath layers of history, the stories of those lost heirs continue to captivate and intrigue us, reminding us of the timeless human fascination with lineage, destiny, and the question of what could have been. For centuries, the world has been captivated by the idea of hidden royal bloodlines, lost heirs, and concealed legacies. It's a theme that transcends cultures, weaving its way through history, folklore, and mythology. The concept of a lost or erased bloodline taps into something deeply human, a longing for continuity, legitimacy, and the idea that the past, with all its power and grandeur, can still influence the present. Whether through political intrigue, assassination, or sheer accident, the bloodlines of kings and queens have been erased from the pages of history, but their stories continue to resonate in powerful ways, shaping the narratives of our modern world. At the heart of this mystery lies a profound question. What does it mean to be royal? To be born into a family with a lineage that stretches back generations, sometimes even centuries, carrying with it the weight of history, destiny, and authority? For much of human history, being born royal wasn't just about inheriting power. It was about being chosen, divinely ordained, or destined to rule. The very concept of royal bloodlines was bound up with ideas of divinity, divine right, and cosmic order. Kings and queens were seen as intermediaries between the gods and the people, tasked with maintaining the balance of the world. Their bloodlines were sacred, representing a link to the divine and the eternal. Yet, as with all power, this sacredness was fragile. Royal families were constantly at risk of being overturned, their bloodlines erased by war, revolution, and betrayal. The history of royal bloodlines is not just a story of power and grandeur, but also one of fragility and loss. Even the most powerful dynasties have fallen, leaving behind no heir, no legacy, and no trace of their once glorious rule. The very idea that a bloodline could be lost or deliberately erased speaks to the vulnerability of power and the lengths to which people will go to preserve their own status. The fate of the Romanov family in Russia serves as one of the most poignant examples of how a royal bloodline can be obliterated from the pages of history. Tsar Nicholas II and his family, once the rulers of an empire spanning 2 continents, were executed in 1918 by Bolshevik forces, their deaths marking the end of the Russian Empire. Their brutal execution was not just a political act. It was an attempt to erase the monarchy from the very fabric of Russian identity. For years, rumors circulated that one of the Romanov children had survived, most notably Anastasia, the youngest daughter. Her survival, if true, would have meant that the Romanov bloodline had not been completely extinguished, and that a potential heir still existed, waiting for the right moment to restore the monarchy. The mystery of Anastasia's fate has become one of the great royal enigmas of the 20th century. The myth of her survival captivated the imaginations of people all over the world, and many women came forward claiming to be the lost princess. Most famously, Anna Anderson, a German woman who spent years in Europe and the United States, insisted that she was Anastasia. Her story, full of twists and turns, became the stuff of legend. Despite the claims, it wasn't until the 2000s, when DNA testing conclusively proved the identities of the Romanov family members, that the mystery was put to rest. All the members of the Romanov family had been executed, and the story of the lost heir was finally ended. Yet, the fact that the mystery of Anastasia persisted for so long speaks to the powerful emotional connection that people had to the idea of the Romanov bloodline. The thought that a royal heir could still be out there, hidden away, waiting to emerge, offered a sense of continuity, a connection to a past that had been violently erased. Even in death, the Romanovs represented something timeless, a symbol of the past that had been abruptly cut off, leaving behind a void that could never be filled. The continued fascination with their story highlights our collective desire to hold on to history, to preserve the legacies of the past, and to believe that, sometimes, bloodlines do not truly vanish but rather persist in some form, waiting for the right moment to reemerge. While the Romanovs may be the most famous case, they are by no means the only example of royal bloodlines that have been erased, concealed, or lost. Throughout history, many royal families have faced similar fates. One of the most remarkable examples lies in the ancient world, the Merovingian dynasty, which ruled the Frankish kingdom in what is now France from the 5th to the 8th centuries. The Merovingians, once a powerful and revered family, are at the heart of one of the most enduring royal mysteries of all time, the claim that they were the descendants of Jesus Christ himself. According to some theories, the Merovingians were not merely rulers of a kingdom, but the protectors of a sacred bloodline, one that was divinely ordained and carried the blood of Christ. This theory gained significant traction in the modern era with the publication of the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail in 1982, which proposed that the Merovingians were the true heirs of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and that their bloodline had been carefully hidden and protected throughout history. The idea was popularized further by Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, a work of fiction that weaved this theory into the fabric of a larger narrative about secret societies, religious conspiracies, and hidden histories. According to this theory, the Merovingians were the guardians of a secret that had the potential to upend Christianity itself. The belief that Christ's bloodline had survived into the present day, hidden in plain sight within royal families across Europe. The Merovingians, however, were ultimately overthrown in the 8th century by the Carolingians, a new dynasty that would come to dominate France. Charlemagne, the most famous of the Carolingians, was crowned emperor of the Holy Roman Empire in 800, and the Carolingian dynasty would go on to rule much of Europe for centuries. Yet, the overthrow of the Merovingians was not just a political coup. It was a deliberate erasure of a bloodline that many believed was too dangerous to allow to survive. The Carolingians not only seized political power but actively sought to remove the Merovingians from the historical record, erasing their legacy and attempting to wipe away any trace of their connection to the divine bloodline. In the case of the Merovingians, the question of their bloodline's significance is not merely a matter of historical curiosity. The idea that royal bloodlines carry with them hidden legacies, sacred destinies, or divine mandates speaks to a broader human fascination with the intersection of history, religion, and power. The Merovingians' connection to the bloodline of Christ, real or imagined, represents the intersection of these three powerful forces: religion, power, and legacy. It raises questions about the nature of royal bloodlines and the lengths to which some would go to preserve or erase them. Was the Carolingian coup a political move driven by the desire for control, or was there something more at play, an effort to protect or suppress a powerful secret, one that could change the way we view history? The story of the Merovingians and their connection to the bloodline of Christ is just one example of how the idea of hidden royal bloodlines has captivated the human imagination throughout history. Whether it is the myth of the Holy Grail or the story of the Romanovs, these bloodlines represent something far more than mere dynastic power. They are tied to deeper myths, to notions of fate, destiny, and divine right. The idea that a bloodline can carry with it the weight of history, of religion, and of prophecy is one of the most enduring and powerful themes in our collective storytelling. As we look back on these hidden bloodlines, whether the Merovingians, the Romanovs, or countless others, we are reminded of the fragility of history and the human desire to preserve the past. These lost or hidden heirs, these bloodlines that were erased or concealed, continue to fascinate us because they represent something that transcends the mundane politics of history. They speak to our yearning for something greater, something more mysterious, something that connects us to the past in ways that are not always visible to the naked eye. The story of the hidden royal bloodline is not just about power, but about the enduring human need to believe in something eternal. Whether through myth, conspiracy, or history itself, these bloodlines continue to stir our imagination, reminding us that some stories, no matter how deeply buried, never truly disappear. They simply wait to be uncovered. In the grand tapestry of history, few threads have been as intricately woven with mystery, power, and intrigue as that of royal bloodlines. These dynasties, whether flourishing in the glory of their golden age or ultimately succumbing to the ravages of time, have played pivotal roles in shaping the world's destiny. Yet, beneath the surface of their publicly recorded histories, There are countless stories of bloodlines that have been deliberately erased, hidden, or obscured. These lost or concealed legacies remain one of the most tantalizing mysteries in the study of history, with each discovery or theory surrounding them adding new layers to an already complex narrative. At the heart of this intrigue lies the notion that royal bloodlines are not just symbols of power, but of divine legitimacy. For centuries, rulers were seen as the earthly manifestations of the divine will, chosen by gods or fate to lead their people. This belief, known as the divine right of kings, meant that the bloodline of a ruler was sacred, tied to the spiritual and moral order of the universe itself. It wasn't just that kings and queens ruled over their kingdoms. They were believed to be appointed by a higher power, and their bloodline carried with it an inherent right to govern. This notion of divine right was most strongly asserted in monarchies throughout medieval and early modern Europe, but it wasn't exclusive to the West. In China, for example, the emperors of the Ming and Qing dynasties were believed to be the direct descendants of the gods. The Emperor of Japan, too, traces his lineage to the sun goddess Amaterasu, a connection that grants the imperial family a unique place in Japanese society. In Egypt, the pharaohs were considered gods on earth, their rule sanctioned by divine forces to maintain harmony in the universe. The sanctity of these bloodlines, then, wasn't merely political. It was existential. To erase or disrupt a royal bloodline was to disrupt the cosmic order itself. But as with all power, these bloodlines were vulnerable. They were not only susceptible to the whims of fate, but to political maneuvering, conspiracies, and the harsh realities of human ambition. The history of royal families is marked by countless instances of erasure, concealment, and loss, sometimes by force, sometimes by design. In many cases, the stories surrounding these lost bloodlines are not just about the deaths of kings and queens, but about the deliberate erasure of their legacy by those who sought to seize power for themselves. One of the most well-known examples of this is the fall of the Merovingian dynasty in France. The Merovingians, who ruled over what is now France from the 5th to the 8th centuries, were a powerful family that claimed to be the descendants of Christ, or at least of a divine lineage. According to some theories, the Merovingians were the caretakers of a sacred bloodline that was protected and hidden away through the centuries. Their fall at the hands of the Carolingians, who would eventually become the rulers of France, was not just a political shift. It was an attempt to erase a legacy that was seen as dangerous. The Merovingians were replaced by the Carolingians, led by the famous Charlemagne, who established the Holy Roman Empire, but in doing so, the Carolingians sought to eliminate any trace of the Merovingian line. The Merovingians' fall is part of a broader pattern seen throughout history, where the reigning family is replaced by a new bloodline that seeks to erase the memory of its predecessors. This was not limited to just France. Throughout Europe, the world saw a constant reshuffling of royal families. Some of them overthrown, others quietly faded into obscurity, their bloodlines lost to history. Perhaps one of the most dramatic examples of this is the fall of the Byzantine Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire, which had stood for over a millennium, saw the gradual decay of its royal bloodlines as rival factions and invaders brought about its downfall. The last of the Byzantine emperors, Constantine XI, died fighting against the Ottoman Turks in 1453, and with him, the last claim to the ancient Roman throne was lost. But the erasure of royal bloodlines wasn't always as obvious as a violent overthrow or a battlefield defeat. In many cases, the process was more insidious, an act of subterfuge, of erasure from the historical record. One of the most famous examples of this is the mysterious disappearance of the lost princes in the Tower of London. Edward V and his younger brother Richard, the sons of King Edward IV of England, were imprisoned in the Tower in 1483 by their uncle, Richard III, who had seized the throne. The princes were never seen again, and their fate has been the subject of speculation and intrigue for centuries. Some historians believe they were murdered on Richard III's orders, while others suggest they were secretly hidden away, their royal bloodline preserved but their names erased from history. The disappearance of the princes marks a pivotal moment in English history, as it represented not only the potential death of a royal bloodline but also the opportunity for a new dynasty, the Tudors, to emerge. In some cases, royal bloodlines were concealed not through violence but through forced exile or imprisonment. In the case of the last emperor of China, Puyi, his bloodline was nearly erased after the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1912. The Qing dynasty had ruled China for nearly 3 centuries, but with the overthrow of the emperor, the imperial family was forced into exile. Puyi, the last emperor, was imprisoned by the Japanese in the 1930s, and the remnants of the Qing royal family were scattered across the globe. For a time, it seemed as though the bloodline had disappeared, with no claimants to the throne and no surviving heirs. But the story of the Qing dynasty's final days was far more complicated, with hidden heirs and lost royal connections coming to light years after Puyi's death. Despite the efforts to erase the royal family from history, the legacy of the Qing dynasty would not be so easily forgotten. Another fascinating example of hidden royal bloodlines can be found in the history of the Russian Empire. As we've already discussed, the Romanovs' fall in 1917 marked the end of the Russian monarchy, but the story didn't end with their execution. For decades after the death of Tsar Nicholas II and his family, rumors swirled that one or more of the Romanov children had survived. The most famous of these rumors centered around Anastasia, the youngest daughter of the Tsar. The legend of Anastasia's survival captivated the public's imagination, and several women came forward over the years claiming to be the lost princess. One of the most well-known impostors was Anna Anderson, who spent years in Germany and the United States insisting that she was Anastasia. The mystery of Anastasia's fate persisted for decades, even as the official account stated that all members of the Romanov family had been executed by the Bolsheviks. DNA testing in the early 21st century finally put an end to the speculation, confirming that Anastasia, along with the rest of the family, had perished in 1918. But the fact that the mystery endured for so long shows just how powerful the idea of a royal bloodline can be. The Romanovs, even in death, continued to haunt the Russian imagination, and the idea that the bloodline could persist in some hidden form kept the hope of the monarchy alive in the hearts of many. The allure of hidden royal bloodlines extends beyond these high-profile examples. In every corner of the globe, there are stories of forgotten monarchs, erased dynasties, and hidden heirs who, for one reason or another, were concealed from the world. These tales speak to a fundamental human desire to believe that bloodlines, particularly those with claims to power, are eternal, that they are more than mere political constructs but are tied to something much larger and more enduring. The idea that these bloodlines can be lost, suppressed, or erased, only to resurface in unexpected ways, is a compelling narrative that resonates with people across cultures and eras. What makes the stories of hidden royal bloodlines so intriguing is not just their connection to power and legitimacy, but their connection to fate and destiny. These bloodlines, whether they were hidden away in secrecy, erased by political force, or left to fade into obscurity, represent the lost potential of history, the what could have been. The idea that these heirs, these royal bloodlines, might one day reemerge to reclaim their rightful place in the world adds an element of mystery and excitement to their stories. It raises the question, what if these lost legacies were to be rediscovered? What if, against all odds, these bloodlines could be restored? The possibility, however remote, fuels our fascination and keeps these stories alive in our collective consciousness. Ultimately, the stories of hidden or lost royal bloodlines remind us of the fragility of power and legacy. The bloodlines of kings and queens may be lost, erased, or concealed, but their echoes remain. Whether through myth, legend, or historical fact, the idea of a royal bloodline that once held power and authority continues to captivate our imaginations, beckoning us to wonder what might have been and what might yet come to pass. These stories are a testament to the enduring human desire for continuity, for connection to the past, and for the belief that sometimes, even when history seems to erase everything, there are secrets waiting to be uncovered. For centuries, the rise and fall of royal bloodlines have shaped the political, social, and cultural landscape of the world. Whether through the collapse of empires, the overthrow of monarchs, or the shifting allegiances that accompany the passage of time, royal families have always been at the center of both power and mystery. While many royal families have left behind well-documented histories, others have been deliberately erased, hidden, or obscured, often with profound consequences for the societies they once ruled. The allure of these hidden bloodlines, lost heirs, and erased legacies is rooted in the notion that royal blood carries with it not only power, but divine right. The belief that kings and queens were chosen by the gods to rule is an ancient and deeply ingrained concept, present in almost every culture that has known monarchy. From the pharaohs of Egypt to the emperors of China, the royal family was often seen as a divine conduit between the heavens and the people. The bloodline of a king was thought to carry the very essence of divinity, making the preservation of that bloodline sacred. To erase such a bloodline, whether by assassination, exile, or conspiracy, was not simply a matter of political expediency, but of erasing a divine connection to the universe itself. This idea of divine right, however, was not just a tool for legitimizing the rule of monarchs. It was also a weapon used by rivals to delegitimize and overthrow existing dynasties. When a ruler's bloodline was considered sacred, those who sought to challenge the monarchy often had to go to great lengths to eliminate or discredit the heirs of the throne. This often meant not just seizing power, but erasing any trace of the previous dynasty to ensure that its legacy could not be restored. Perhaps the most famous example of this is the fall of the Romanovs, the last imperial family of Russia. In 1917, after centuries of autocratic rule, the Russian Revolution led to the downfall of Tsar Nicholas II and his family. The Romanovs, who had ruled Russia for over 3 centuries, were murdered by Bolshevik forces in 1918. For years, rumors circulated that one or more members of the royal family had survived the execution. Anastasia, the youngest daughter of Nicholas II, became the focal point of these rumors. Her purported survival captivated the public imagination for decades, with many people refusing to believe that such a royal bloodline could simply vanish. Women came forward over the years claiming to be Anastasia, and the mystery of her fate persisted until DNA testing in the 2000s confirmed that all members of the Romanov family had indeed been killed. The fact that this mystery endured for so long speaks to the deep-seated belief that a royal bloodline is not easily erased, that, even in death, the bloodline of a king or queen remains something of great importance. The mystery surrounding Anastasia's survival also highlights the emotional attachment that many people have to royal families. The Romanovs were not simply rulers. They were symbols of Russian identity and continuity. Their execution marked the end of an era, and the idea that one of their children might still be alive represented a glimmer of hope for those who yearned for the return of the monarchy. Despite the fact that the revolution was supposed to be about breaking with the past and creating a new future, the Russian people, many of whom were devastated by the loss of the imperial family, continued to cling to the idea that the Romanovs' bloodline could be restored. This speaks to a broader human desire to preserve the past, to hold on to legacies and bloodlines that we believe to be more than just political entities, but sacred ties to history and identity. In other parts of the world, similar stories of hidden heirs and lost royal bloodlines have captured the imagination of the public. One of the most fascinating examples of this is the story of the lost princes in England. Edward V and his younger brother Richard, the sons of King Edward IV, were imprisoned in the Tower of London in 1483, shortly after the death of their father. The two boys were never seen again, and their fate has been the subject of intrigue and speculation for centuries. The most widely accepted theory is that the boys were murdered on the orders of their uncle, Richard III, who had seized the throne. However, many historians and conspiracy theorists have suggested that the princes were secretly hidden away, their royal bloodline preserved, but their names erased from history. The disappearance of the princes is not just a historical mystery. It is also a story about the fragility of royal power. The boys were the heirs to the throne, and their disappearance left a power vacuum that allowed Richard III to seize the throne. If the princes had survived, their bloodline could have posed a direct challenge to Richard's claim to the throne, and the entire course of English history might have been different. In this way, the disappearance of the princes was not merely a matter of royal succession. It was a question of political survival. The fear that the bloodline of Edward IV could still challenge Richard III's rule was a powerful motivator for the events that followed. In some cases, royal bloodlines were not erased through violence or political maneuvering, but through more subtle means. Exile, for instance, was a common way for royal families to remove rivals without the need for bloodshed. The last emperor of China, Puyi, offers a striking example of this. Huai was crowned emperor as a child in 1908, but the Qing dynasty was overthrown in 1912, marking the end of over 2 millennia of imperial rule. Huai was forced into exile, and the imperial family was effectively erased from public life. The bloodline, however, did not disappear entirely. Though Huai never returned to the throne, his story and that of the Qing dynasty remain a part of China's cultural memory. Huai's story also highlights the impact of the loss of a royal bloodline on a nation's sense of identity. The Qing dynasty, which had ruled China for nearly 3 centuries, represented the culmination of China's imperial history. The fall of the Qing dynasty marked the end of an era, and with it, the loss of a lineage that had symbolized the unity and continuity of the Chinese empire. For many people, the disappearance of the imperial family left a void that could never be filled. The idea of the lost emperor, who might one day return to restore the empire, persisted for many years after the fall of the Qing. The loss of royal bloodlines is not just a matter of political succession. It is also a matter of cultural and national identity. Royal families often serve as symbols of continuity, representing a link to the past and a foundation for the future. When these bloodlines are lost or erased, the nation loses something vital. This loss is not only political but emotional, as it severs the connection between the people and their historical roots. The stories of lost royal bloodlines speak to a deeper human need to understand the passage of time and the nature of legacy. These bloodlines represent not just the power to rule, but the continuity of history itself. The idea that royal families could be erased, hidden, or lost entirely raises fundamental questions about the nature of legacy and the fragility of history. How much of our past is truly lost, and how much of it remains, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be uncovered? The emotional power of these stories is undeniable. Whether it's the story of Anastasia's survival, the mystery of the lost princes, or the legacy of the Romanovs and the Qing dynasty, these royal bloodlines represent more than just dynastic succession. They represent the human need for continuity, for a sense of connection to the past. When these bloodlines are erased, hidden, or lost, it is not just the monarchy that disappears. It is a piece of the nation's soul. The allure of these lost heirs and hidden legacies is rooted in the desire to preserve something timeless and enduring, to believe that, even in a world of constant change, there is something that remains eternal, the bloodline of kings and queens. These stories, steeped in mystery and intrigue, remind us that history is not always as clear-cut as it appears. For every royal family whose bloodline has been preserved and celebrated, there are others whose stories have been hidden, forgotten, or erased. The question remains, how much of the past has been lost, and how much is waiting to be rediscovered? The answer, perhaps, lies in the bloodlines themselves, in the forgotten heirs who may one day return to claim their place in history, or in the stories we continue to tell, keeping the legacy of royal bloodlines alive in our collective consciousness. For centuries, the concept of royal bloodlines has been woven into the fabric of human civilization, with their significance often far outweighing their mere political role. Royal families were not just rulers. They were the embodiment of a nation's soul, representing continuity, divine legitimacy, and the connection between the earthly and the divine. As such, the fate of a royal bloodline often carries profound consequences, not just for the rulers themselves but for the entire society. The loss, erasure, or obscuring of these bloodlines is often more than a matter of politics. It is a cultural and emotional rupture, a wound in the very identity of a nation. Royal bloodlines were often seen as sacred, imbued with a divine right to rule. This was especially true in monarchies that linked their authority to religious or cosmic principles. In many parts of the world, rulers were not simply kings or queens. They were considered gods or descendants of gods. In Egypt, the pharaohs were believed to be the living gods, acting as intermediaries between the gods and the people. In Japan, the imperial family traces its lineage to the sun goddess Amaterasu, and the emperor was considered a divine being, a living god on earth. In medieval Europe, the concept of the divine right of kings elevated monarchs to a position where their bloodline was not just political but sacred, a continuation of divine will. The idea of royal bloodlines being divinely ordained was so deeply ingrained in many cultures that the disruption or destruction of a royal family was not just seen as a political act but a cosmic imbalance. When a royal family fell, whether through war, revolution, or assassination, it was often perceived as an upheaval in the natural order of the world. The bloodline, once severed, could never be restored. This belief made the erasure or suppression of royal bloodlines even more profound. It wasn't just about removing a rival power. It was about obliterating a divinely sanctioned legacy. To erase a royal bloodline was to undo a sacred connection to the divine and the eternal. One of the most famous examples of this cultural and emotional rupture is the fall of the Romanovs, the last imperial family of Russia. Tsar Nicholas II and his family were not merely political rulers. They were seen as symbols of Russia's history, its identity, and its place in the world. The Russian Orthodox Church, which played a major role in the religious life of the Russian people, considered the Romanovs to be divinely appointed rulers, their bloodline blessed by God. This divine legitimacy made their fall all the more tragic, not just for the Romanovs but for the Russian people. The Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 resulted in the brutal execution of Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, and their 5 children. The murder of the Romanovs was not just the end of a royal family. It was the symbolic end of an entire era in Russian history. Despite the Bolsheviks' attempts to erase the Romanovs from history, the people's attachment to the family remained deep. Rumors began to spread that one or more of the Romanovs had survived, particularly the youngest daughter, Anastasia. The mystery surrounding her survival persisted for decades, with numerous women claiming to be Anastasia. The idea of a surviving Romanov heir became a symbol of hope for those who wished for the return of the monarchy, for the restoration of a divine right that they believed had been unjustly taken from them. While DNA tests later confirmed that all the Romanovs had perished in 1918, the fact that the story of Anastasia's survival remained so powerful for so long speaks to the enduring emotional attachment people had to the idea of royal bloodlines. It wasn't just about the Romanovs themselves but about the hope that the divine right of kings could never truly be erased, that their legacy would always persist in the hearts and minds of the people. The Romanovs were not just a family. They were a symbol of a connection to Russia's past, a past that many were reluctant to let go of. The story of the Romanovs is just one example of how royal bloodlines can shape the emotional and cultural identity of a nation. Throughout history, the fates of royal families have been intimately tied to the larger narrative of the people they ruled. When a royal bloodline is lost or erased, it is not merely a political change. It is the erasure of a shared history, a shared identity. The disappearance of the Romanovs represented the end of imperial Russia, the fall of a regime that had ruled for over 3 centuries. The emotional impact of their loss went far beyond the immediate political upheaval. It was a cultural trauma, one that the Russian people struggled with for decades. Similarly, the fall of other royal families has had similar emotional and cultural repercussions. The fate of the Habsburgs, for example, marked the end of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the fall of a dynasty that had once ruled over vast swathes of Europe. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire similarly brought an end to the centuries-old legacy of the sultans who had ruled over much of the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe. The loss of these bloodlines was not just a matter of political power. It was the loss of a shared cultural and historical identity. The trauma of these losses reverberated long after the fall of the empires themselves. In some cases, royal bloodlines were deliberately erased not just to remove a rival family, but to reshape the political and cultural landscape of a country. The overthrow of the Merovingians in 8th century France is one such example. The Merovingian dynasty, which had ruled over the Frankish kingdom for nearly 3 centuries, was replaced by the Carolingians, led by the famous Charlemagne. The Carolingians sought not just to consolidate their own power but to erase the legacy of the Merovingians, who were believed by some to be the guardians of a sacred bloodline that connected them to Christ. The Carolingians worked to erase any trace of the Merovingians' divine legitimacy, not only by removing their political power but by systematically discrediting their claim to a sacred lineage. The Merovingians' fall was not just a political shift, it was a cultural and theological erasure. This pattern of erasure is evident throughout history. When a new dynasty or regime comes to power, It often seeks to obliterate the legacy of the previous rulers, particularly if those rulers were seen as divinely appointed. The desire to consolidate power and legitimacy often involves not just seizing control of the throne but rewriting the narrative of history to exclude the previous rulers and their bloodlines. This erasure is not always immediate. It can take place over centuries, as the memories of lost dynasties fade into the past. One of the most fascinating aspects of royal bloodlines is how the concept of divine right persists even after the political power of monarchies fades. In modern times, many royal families have transitioned from ruling powers to largely ceremonial roles. Yet, the symbolic power of their bloodlines remains. In Britain, for example, the royal family continues to play a major role in the national identity, even though it no longer holds any real political power. The British royal family is seen by many as a symbol of continuity, a connection to the nation's past, and a link to the divine right of kings that once governed the land. This symbolic power of royal bloodlines is not confined to the British monarchy. Across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, royal families continue to exert cultural and symbolic influence, even in countries where monarchies no longer hold power. The idea that a royal bloodline is eternal, that it can survive political upheaval and historical change, continues to resonate with people around the world. Even when the monarchy has been replaced by a republic or a constitutional system, the legacy of royal bloodlines persists, woven into the fabric of the nation's identity. In many ways, the concept of royal bloodlines speaks to a deeper human desire for continuity and stability. The idea that a family's bloodline can endure through the ages, surviving wars, revolutions, and political shifts, taps into a universal need for connection to the past. Royal families, even in their decline, serve as symbols of that connection, embodying the continuity of a nation's history and culture. When these bloodlines are lost or erased, it is not just the monarchy that disappears, it is a part of the nation's soul. The stories of lost royal bloodlines, hidden heirs, and erased legacies continue to captivate our imaginations because they speak to a fundamental human longing. The desire for something eternal, something that transcends the ephemeral nature of power and politics. The fate of these bloodlines, whether lost in the fog of history or deliberately erased by those in power, continues to intrigue and haunt us. They represent the enduring power of legacy and the belief that even in the face of destruction, royal bloodlines can survive, waiting to be rediscovered or revived. As we look back on the history of these lost legacies, we are reminded of the fragility of power and the human need for continuity. Whether it is the Romanovs, the Merovingians, or countless other dynasties, the stories of royal bloodlines that were erased or obscured remind us that history is never as settled as it seems. The legacies of kings and queens, their bloodlines, and their fates are intertwined with the larger narrative of human history, and in their loss, we are reminded of our own fragility, our own desire to preserve what is eternal in the face of time's inevitable march. Throughout the course of history, royal bloodlines have consistently held a mystique that transcends mere politics. These lines of descent, often thought to be divinely ordained, have carried with them the weight of nations, the hopes of people, and the very identity of empires. To be a member of such a bloodline was to be more than just a ruler. It was to be a symbol, a living embodiment of history itself. Yet, as powerful and enduring as these bloodlines seemed, they were also incredibly fragile. Whether by conquest, betrayal, or mere happenstance, the legacy of royal families has often been erased or lost, leaving behind a vacuum of power and a deep longing for what was lost. This perpetual cycle of rise, fall, and erasure has become a core theme in the narrative of human civilization, one that continues to resonate with us to this day. At the heart of these stories lies the idea that royal bloodlines are more than just political entities. They are symbols of continuity, divine legitimacy, and cultural identity. In many societies, monarchs were not merely seen as rulers, but as the direct representatives of the divine on earth. In ancient Egypt, the pharaohs were not just kings but gods themselves, intermediaries between the people and the gods. Their bloodlines were considered sacred, and their right to rule was seen as a divine decree. Similarly, in Japan, the imperial family is said to trace its lineage back to the sun goddess Amaterasu, granting them an almost divine status. The sacred nature of these bloodlines created a sense of permanence, as if these families were destined to rule forever, their place in the world unshakable. This divine connection to the bloodline was not limited to just one culture or region. In medieval Europe, the concept of the divine right of kings elevated monarchs to a near-sacred status. The idea that kings were chosen by God to rule was deeply ingrained in the political and religious fabric of society. It wasn't just that the monarchs had power, they had divine permission to wield it. This belief was so powerful that it made the very notion of removing or eliminating a royal family seem almost blasphemous. To erase a royal bloodline was not merely a political act. It was a disruption of the cosmic order itself. But despite the sacredness of these bloodlines, history has shown time and time again that even the most divinely sanctioned monarchies could be brought to an end. The fall of these royal families, and the subsequent erasure of their bloodlines, often marked the end of entire eras and the reshaping of civilizations. Whether through war, revolution, or internal betrayal, these bloodlines were vulnerable to forces that often had nothing to do with their legitimacy or divine right to rule. In fact, many royal families found themselves wiped from the pages of history, not by their own failures, but by the ambitions of others, seeking to claim the power that was once held by a distant bloodline. One of the most well-known examples of this phenomenon is the Romanov family, the last imperial family of Russia. The Romanovs ruled Russia for over 3 centuries, and their bloodline was deeply intertwined with the history and identity of the Russian people. The Tsars were seen as not only political leaders, but as the guardians of Russia's traditions, culture, and spirituality. Their bloodline was perceived as sacred, a continuation of the divine right to rule. But in 1917, the Russian Revolution brought about the end of the Romanov dynasty. Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, and their 5 children were executed by Bolshevik forces in 1918. The brutality of their murder was a statement not only about the overthrow of the monarchy but also about the erasure of a royal bloodline that had been the foundation of Russian rule for centuries. In the aftermath of the Romanov executions, a deep sense of loss pervaded Russian society. The Romanovs were not just rulers. They were part of the Russian national identity. Their execution marked the end of an era, and the idea that a royal heir might still survive was something that people clung to. The most famous of these legends was that of Anastasia Romanov, the youngest daughter of the Tsar. For years, rumors circulated that Anastasia had somehow survived the massacre, and numerous women came forward claiming to be the lost princess. One of the most notable was Anna Anderson, who spent decades in Europe and the United States insisting that she was Anastasia. Her claim captivated the world and became a symbol of hope for those who wished to see the Romanov dynasty restored. The story of Anastasia's potential survival has become one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century. Despite the official story that the Romanovs were all killed, the idea that a surviving heir could one day return and restore the monarchy fueled imaginations for decades. The mystery only deepened when DNA testing, carried out in the early 21st century, confirmed that all the Romanovs had been executed, ending the speculation that Anastasia, or any of the Romanov children, had survived. Yet, the fact that this mystery persisted for so long highlights a central theme in the story of royal bloodlines: the enduring power of the bloodline itself. Even in death, the Romanovs remained a symbol of Russian history and the potential return of something lost. While the Romanovs' fall is one of the most widely known examples of a royal bloodline's erasure, it is by no means the only one. Throughout history, many royal families have been replaced or wiped out by conquerors, rebels, or rival dynasties. In the case of the ancient Merovingian dynasty in France, a powerful royal family was overthrown and replaced by the Carolingians in the 8th century. The Merovingians, whose reign stretched back for several centuries, were seen as the protectors of a sacred bloodline, and some even believed that they were the descendants of Christ himself. The Carolingians, led by Charlemagne, sought not only to claim the throne for themselves but to erase the memory of the Merovingians. Their rise to power marked the end of one of the most fascinating and mysterious royal bloodlines in history. The story of the Merovingians highlights an important aspect of royal bloodlines: the desire to preserve or eradicate them. In many cases, when a new dynasty comes to power, It seeks to erase the legacy of the previous rulers. This can be done through political maneuvering, but also through cultural and historical suppression. By erasing the memory of a royal bloodline, the new rulers are able to solidify their own legitimacy and establish a new narrative. This process of erasure is not just about removing individuals from power, it is about erasing the very foundation of the old regime's legitimacy, rewriting history to ensure that no trace of the previous family remains. This need to erase the past and rewrite history has been a constant theme throughout royal history. One of the most famous examples of this can be found in the story of the Lost Princes of England. In 1483, Edward V and his younger brother Richard were imprisoned in the Tower of London by their uncle, Richard III, who had seized the throne. The princes were never seen again, and their fate has been the subject of intrigue for centuries. The most popular theory is that they were murdered, likely on Richard III's orders, but some have speculated that the princes were secretly hidden away, their bloodline preserved but their names erased from history. If the princes had survived, they would have posed a serious challenge to Richard's claim to the throne, and their bloodline could have reshaped the course of English history. The story of the Lost Princes is emblematic of the lengths to which people will go to preserve or eliminate royal bloodlines. The notion that the bloodline of a king or queen could be hidden or erased entirely speaks to the powerful role that these bloodlines played in the political and cultural fabric of society. Whether through violence, imprisonment, or subterfuge, the fate of royal bloodlines often determined the course of history itself. The erasure of royal bloodlines also has a profound emotional impact on the people who lived through it. When a royal family falls, it is not just a political event, it is a cultural trauma. Royal families represent the continuity of a nation's history, and when that continuity is broken, it leaves a void. The people who lived through the fall of a royal bloodline often feel as though they have lost a part of themselves, a part of their history, and their identity. This emotional bond to royal families is what makes the stories of lost heirs and hidden bloodlines so compelling. These bloodlines are not just symbols of power. They are symbols of identity, continuity, and belonging. Even today, the idea of hidden royal bloodlines continues to capture our imagination. Whether through the legends of lost heirs, the search for hidden descendants, or the continuing power of royal families in the modern world, the allure of royal bloodlines remains as strong as ever. These stories speak to a deep-seated desire to understand our connection to the past, to preserve our sense of identity, and to believe that, even in the face of loss, something eternal remains. The enduring fascination with lost royal bloodlines is a testament to the profound impact that these families have had on history, culture, and identity. From the Romanovs to the Merovingians, from the lost princes of England to the fading monarchies of today, the bloodlines of kings and queens continue to intrigue us because they represent something more than just politics. They represent the continuity of history itself, the sacred ties that bind us to the past and to each other. Whether hidden, erased, or lost, royal bloodlines never truly disappear. They live on in our stories, our imaginations, and our collective memory. The significance of royal bloodlines is not only political but also deeply cultural and emotional. They represent an unbroken link to the past, the continuity of tradition, and often the very identity of a nation. This connection to the past is what makes the erasure of a royal bloodline so poignant. When a dynasty falls, it is not just the end of an era of rule but the loss of a cultural anchor. This loss reverberates through the collective consciousness of the people, creating a sense of mourning for what is gone and an intense longing for something that may never be restored. The emotional stakes involved in the preservation of royal bloodlines are high. These families often symbolize more than just authority. They embody the dreams, hopes, and aspirations of the people they rule. They are seen as the living embodiment of national identity, a symbol of continuity in the face of change and turmoil. Therefore, when a royal bloodline is wiped out or erased, it feels like a rupture in the very fabric of society. The political and emotional fallout is profound. Take, for instance, the fall of the Bourbon dynasty in France. The French Revolution, one of the most significant turning points in European history, marked not only the collapse of an absolute monarchy, but the obliteration of a centuries-old royal family. The executions of King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette were not just acts of political rebellion. They were symbolic of the breaking of ties with the past. The Bourbon family, like other royal families before and after them, represented a divine right to rule. Their bloodline was sacred in the eyes of many, and their fall caused an emotional and cultural trauma that lingered long after the revolution. Even as France moved towards a republican form of government, the remnants of royalism remained, carried by those who mourned the loss of their kings and queens. Similar emotional reactions can be seen in the aftermath of the destruction of the Inca Empire. At the height of their power, the Incas were not merely rulers. They were considered descendants of the sun god, Inti. Their bloodline was not just royal, it was divine. The sudden collapse of the empire with the Spanish conquest not only shattered the political structure but also created a deep sense of loss for a civilization whose rulers were seen as gods among men. The emotional devastation felt by the people of the Andes at the loss of their Incan emperor, Atahualpa, and the subsequent obliteration of the Incan bloodline echoes the universal theme of the sacredness of royal lineage and the pain of its erasure. This deep connection between royal bloodlines and national identity has continued into the modern era. Even in countries where monarchy has lost its political power, royal families still evoke strong emotional reactions. In the United Kingdom, the royal family remains a focal point for national pride and continuity, despite their symbolic rather than political role. The idea of royal bloodlines continues to serve as a powerful symbol, not just of tradition, but of the collective memory of a nation's past. The very idea that these bloodlines can be lost, hidden, or erased only heightens the emotional investment people have in them. Ultimately, the enduring fascination with royal bloodlines lies in the emotional and cultural ties that bind people to these families. They are not just figures of power, they are symbols of the past, of continuity, and of an unbroken connection to something larger than themselves. When these bloodlines are erased, it is not just the loss of a family, but the loss of a piece of history, a piece of identity, and a symbol of a nation's soul. Throughout history, royal bloodlines have not only been the foundation of political power, but also the bearers of national identity and continuity. The emotional and cultural devastation caused by the fall of a royal family is profound, as it often signifies the end of an era, an entire worldview shattered. In many societies, monarchs were seen as divine figures, their bloodlines believed to be a direct link between the human realm and the gods. The destruction or erasure of these bloodlines often felt like a rupture in the very fabric of society itself. The legacy of lost royal families, from the Romanovs in Russia to the Aztec emperors in Mexico, continues to captivate people's imaginations because it symbolizes more than just the end of an empire. It is the erasure of a sacred connection to the divine. When these bloodlines disappear, it leaves a void that cannot easily be filled, not just in terms of power but in terms of collective memory. Even in the modern age, royal families that no longer wield political power continue to symbolize continuity, tradition, and national identity. The fascination with lost heirs and hidden royal legacies reminds us that royal bloodlines are not just about politics. They are about legacy, continuity, and the preservation of a nation's soul. The quest to uncover lost royal bloodlines often intersects with the mysterious realm of hidden heirs and secret descendants. These lost figures, sometimes rumored to be the true heirs to thrones or empires, embody a deep cultural fascination with continuity and the unknown. The idea that a royal family's bloodline might survive in the shadows, waiting to be rediscovered, captures the imagination in a way that no mere political shift could. These stories offer a sense of hope and continuity, an emotional lifeline for those who long for the restoration of an era long past. For centuries, rumors of hidden heirs have circulated, especially in the aftermath of royal upheaval. Take, for example, the stories surrounding the last emperor of China, Puyi. Overthrown by revolution, Puyi's life became one of secrecy, political exile, and fleeting power. Yet, even after his fall, the idea of the true heir persisted among many, reflecting the lingering desire for the continuity of an ancient dynasty. Such mysteries are not limited to monarchies, but span across cultures, creating an enduring mythos of lost royal bloodlines whose fate remains tantalizingly elusive. The allure lies not in the power they once wielded, but in the potential for an unbroken line of legacy to reappear and reshape history. The erasure of royal bloodlines often carries with it an emotional resonance that goes beyond political shifts. It is a loss that affects the collective identity of the people. When monarchs fall, they are not just deposed rulers. They are the living embodiment of a nation's history, its customs, and its sense of self. For many, the royal family is a symbol of continuity, representing stability in the face of change. But when these bloodlines are severed, there is an undeniable sense of rupture. This is seen not only in the case of ancient dynasties like the Aztecs, whose emperors were thought to be direct descendants of gods, but also in more recent histories, such as the Romanovs or the Habsburgs. The death or exile of monarchs is symbolic of a deeper, almost spiritual loss, a fracture in the cultural memory that connects generations. And even when these bloodlines are seemingly erased from the political landscape, their echoes remain in stories, myths, and symbols that persist throughout history. The people, in their search for something eternal, continue to honor the lost bloodlines, perpetuating the idea that what is lost can never truly disappear. The legacy of these forgotten monarchs continues to haunt the present, shaping how we view power, destiny, and identity. In the aftermath of the upheaval that destroys royal bloodlines, there often emerges a sense of void, a gap in both the collective and personal identity of a nation. The memory of these once powerful families lingers like a shadow, but the disappearance of their bloodlines leaves a haunting question behind. What happens to the legacy of a people when their symbols of continuity vanish? The end of an era, the fall of an ancient lineage, is a stark reminder that history is constantly shifting, and with every rise and fall, something vital is lost. The emotional resonance of these royal families, their divine mandates, and their once immense power are replaced by the harsh realities of a world that no longer holds room for them. Yet, it is often in the destruction of these dynasties that new forms of identity and power take root. The collapse of a bloodline does not simply erase a people's history. It forces them to reckon with their future. From the ashes of fallen empires, new structures of governance, culture, and national identity can arise. Even so, the question remains, what if those royal bloodlines, with their rich histories and legacies, could have been preserved? Would their survival have changed the trajectory of nations, or would their eventual erasure have been inevitable? The concept of royal bloodlines is intricately tied to the human desire for continuity and identity. While monarchs once embodied the divine connection between heaven and earth, history has repeatedly shown that no bloodline, however sacred, is immune to the forces of time and turmoil. The fall of these dynasties, often through revolution, betrayal, or conquest, leaves a deep emotional mark on society. These royal families, despite their downfall, remain embedded in cultural memory, symbolizing both the fragility and permanence of power. Their stories echo through time, reminding us that even lost bloodlines shape the way we understand legacy, identity, and history.